Well, we are very late, but we are here, and I blame whatever the start of the school season is because just every time the school season starts, our kids bring something home, and I end up getting kicked with it.
Yeah, well, we all cycled through being horribly ill, so.
Yeah.
Is the audio coming through okay?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Just
Yeah.
want to make sure.
You see that?
Yeah.
That's keeping track of it. Yeah.
Just want to make sure.
I can, so later on in post, I can increase the volume.
Okay.
One of the reasons I keep it low is because it helps to filter out any noise, like such as from the chair.
I see.
But in any case, we are going to be discussing your guys' reviews, and then this next chapter that's coming up, which is kind of a follow-up to some pretty big bombs being revealed. So just for a quick refresher, last chapter the last chapter was the one where everybody gets back from the mountain rescue bit. That was pretty depressing. Had some good character development between Mina and Ida there. Kurai and Eri got to work together, and you kind of saw them helping each other out in different ways. Eri's learning more about what it is to be a hero, like when there's more people to save than not. But then, of course, you also find out that the teachers are all have a gun being held to their heads, being like, "Hey, guess what? Time to tell these guys what's happening."
Yeah.
And you got Akarui freaking out the worst, which should tell you how bad stuff is about to get. So let's go ahead and see what people had to say about it. Let me there it is.
All right. So, first review.
We have
Joe Clone. Ooh, boy. Heavy chapter all around. The ride back with the other young heroes went fine until the poor Switch lookalike showed up. She seemed really nice too. Arya? Hope she's okay after that. Wonder what Mina will get out of Kudai after they're alone.
That was a reference to how he saw basically his childhood bully, pretty brutally dead. And he like it's one of those things that's like it's gonna go unspoken in terms of the narrative, but it's like he's thinking back on this and he knows who he needs to talk to about it, kind of thing.
What are Hatsume and Akarui working on? Final solution stuff?
I'm gonna say phrasing, dude, because yeah, final solution's probably not something you should be saying to a guy who's descended from Jews.
Ay. I know not of...
Yeah, I don't know how to answer that. I'm sorry.
I know not of who Mr. Smiley is. Moving on.
Not moving on for a second. Mr. Smiley is an OVA episode that was honestly really
hilarious. It is honestly...
It was hilarious.
It's one of the best OVA episodes.
Oh, yeah.
You'd love it.
Like... there's not a single My Hero Academia OVA episode that I dislike, but that one's kind of up there. That one was really funny. All right, now moving on.
Funny that you think Xenoverse 10 would exist, considering all the
downloadable content that 2 is still getting.
At that point, I would think they'd move on from that formula. Rest in peace, Akira Toriyama.
Yep. I don't know if we discussed him passing
Akira
away.
Toriyama.
Yeah, I don't know if we discussed him passing away on this, but that was pretty crazy.
Good to know Weiss likes some good Italian espresso. And Akabane and Asada are both joining the hero course? Man, you're adding so many characters, you might as well make a Class 1C.
So, I'll touch on that real quick. Basically, the idea is that these guys are going to join classes A and B once... what are you doing?
Don't worry about it.
What are you doing in my notebook?
I'm decorating it so I don't pick up at my scabs.
Okay. So they're going to be joining the classes officially when the Ruby characters go back to the States. Essentially, is the plan.
Got it.
So like I'm like, yeah, if I was adding again more characters, that'd be like six extra students for each class. It's like, yeah, you might as well split them up into 3 classes at that point. But no, that's not the plan. Let's see.
Alrighty. Now, brief relaxation is over, and Aizawa and All Might are here with the worst news of all time. Eri fixed All Might's stomach. Wonder what he'd look like, more buff without his quirk?
I mean, in my head, he's still, like, you don't just magically gain muscle overnight, but he's kind of working on it, so it's like, he looks better than he does in the anime.
He's not on death's door.
Yeah, he's like, he's
not frail.
He's not a scarecrow.
Little
he's not a scarecrow anymore. Like, you don't look at him and just immediately think, wow, you could cut yourself on those cheekbones. Like, he's filled out a little bit.
Okay. Nice. Akarui, yikes on that language, but I get it.
Yeah.
I know, same thought, buddy. Wait, didn't you reveal the identity of the Shadow Nomu as the murderer of Kudai and Akurui's dad? Why did I not think of that, you mad genius?
I revealed that in the podcast. I never actually revealed it in the story. It's a dramatic irony.
Okay.
Like, the readers know about, like...
The readers know,
listeners, they know about it. The characters don't know. The characters are probably never going to know.
Oh, no. Don't do it, Aki. Not again. You can't do it again. You won't survive. Please rethink.
So, in the preview, we see Akarui trying to decide whether or not he's going to boost his quirk again.
All right. Well, thank you, Joe Clone. Very Sin Girl. I liked...
This is from a couple of chapters ago, I think, but we'll go ahead.
I liked the part where Mina protected that mom and her 2 kids.
That was fun.
Also, isn't the thunderclap and flash also Zenitsu Agatsuma's technique in Demon Slayer?
Yeah, it's a really cool technique. The problem is that it goes to, like, the worst character in that show. Thanks for the review.
Thank you, Fairy Sin Girl. All right, Silly Kita. Are you okay, dude? I'm about to start keeping a tally for how many times you get injured in a year. Same, buddy. It's been out of control.
It's not like I'm going out of my way for it to happen.
I know. He's just... I don't know what's going on. He's so busy thinking of story prompts that he's running into things and injuring himself. I don't know.
I didn't... Okay, no. First one was someone shut a door on my head. The other one was... I guess I didn't pay attention to whether or not they put the cleaning solution on. I didn't walk into anything. I just fell out of the back of a truck.
Don't forget, your grating, getting your thumb pulled out of its socket.
That affects my ability to type, not think.
All right.
Sorry. Anyways.
The opening scene was very cute. Good for the warm fuzzies. It was mentioned in the last chapter, I think, about how some of the other heroes and rescue workers were helping Kai and Eri to avoid the media. But something about actually seeing it in scene was really cool to read.
Yeah. I liked closing out that part of the arc where we're getting to see the hero community kind of come together for this guy.
The one part that I'm conflicted on how to feel about is that Kai was responsible for saving the bus driver's family members. On the one hand, I get it. Kai saved a lot of people with this battle in Fukuoka, so it stands to reason that there are many more who would have been vicariously affected by that, and they'd be all over the place. Not just that city. On the other hand, I feel like you're walking a little too close to the line of making this world too small. Maybe that's just me, and it's certainly not a hill that I'll die on, but I did feel like making a note of it.
Fair enough. I don't know. I could have gone either way with that. I just felt like it was kind of a fun thing to include. Like, again, like you mentioned, it's like, yeah, his actions in that one city would have affected people all over the place. Like, not just like in terms of social media posts. Like, there are people who, live in that city, and there would be people who are worried about them who live other places. Like, I have family that lives out in a certain part of Kansas. If I hear that, a tornado were to rip up that part of Kansas, I would be worried. I would call and be like, hey, are you guys okay? So like that's kind of along the lines that I was thinking of.
Yeah, see, for me, making the world too small is like, oh my gosh, random enemy. Oh, he's actually my first cousin. And oh, this person, like the president, we know him because, see that for me, when like all the important characters just happen to know or be related to each other or connected to each other in some way, that's when it becomes problematic.
So when the important characters are all too
for me, when there's like a side random character who happens to know somebody who knows somebody who was saved, like that is more realistic because it's like for me as like just like this is I know I always bring it back to teaching because that's just my job, but it's like I've taught over 2,000 kids at this point because I've changed schools so many times and it's not my fault, it's just the district. But that being said, I run into kids who I've taught all over the place. And we don't live in a small city. Like, what's our city's population?
I believe it's like 800,000 something.
Yeah, so 800,000 people in this city. And I run into my students all over the place. Like, not just in the part of town where I've taught. Like, I even found, like, super, super random. Like, there was a student in, like, the farthest school I've ever taught at who just happens to live on the other side of the block from us. And I didn't even know. It's like super random because we live so far away from that school, but it just happened to work out that way. And so like coincidences do happen, and like we always have those small world moments. Like it happens. So I mean,
I was like, and like again, I feel like this was more or less as random as I could make it. Like this wasn't something that I planned out ahead of time. I was just like, what if the bus driver, what if the bus driver, knew somebody?
Yeah.
Like I think when I was planning this chapter, it was like kind of going to be a toss-up between the bus driver or some of the other student heroes.
It's almost
and I felt like I think I decided to go for the bus driver because the student heroes already have enough of a reason to look up to this guy or be interested in him at least. I'm like, I feel like if I had added to that, it would have come across as a little obnoxious.
Almost like everybody, if you look hard enough, you're going to have some connection to something.
Well, yeah, we're all separated by like 6 degrees or something.
Yeah, like, I mean, if you think about it, like almost everybody knows somebody who was affected by 9/11, whether they lost a family member or they were in New York like 2 days before and just happened to be out, or like they were working in the Pentagon. It's like,
so like my dad, so when 9/11 happened, we didn't know anybody personally, but my dad went on to work with a lot of people who had been there or who were what a lot of people either don't know or have forgotten is that the Pentagon was another target, and the plane that was hijacked for that, the passengers took control back, and they crashed the plane themselves.
I remember that.
To make sure that it wasn't taken over again. Because like at that point, like they were too low on the altitude to like pull it up, and you didn't have the internet back then. You couldn't look up, hey, how do I stop a plane from crash landing? So the only thing that they were able to do is figure out how to crash it somewhere that wasn't inhabited. Which if you've been to Washington D.C., that's really hard to do.
Yeah, so I mean, but when there's a really massive catastrophe on that scale, like it affects so many people that it's like, oh, I had an uncle who was a police officer and got called in at that point, So.
Yeah, sorry. What I was originally trying to get at is that my dad ended up working with a lot of those people when he was at the Pentagon. I went and visited his office in the Pentagon. There is an entire wall dedicated to the names of the people who did die in 9/11 because that's where the plane was projected to have crashed, would have been that section. So as a correlation and reminder of what could have happened, they have that memorial there.
Got it.
Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, I mean, I don't know. For me, the bus driver having known somebody who was saved, like, I didn't think that was too much of a stretch, but that could just be me. But yeah, no. I can see it, though. I can see both sides. Alrighty.
Wait a minute. What was it? It was... No, that was it. They did hit the Pentagon, but it wasn't as bad as it could have been, was the thing. That's what it was. Sorry. I was like, wait a minute. I got something wrong there.
It's okay.
Sorry.
It's been a few years.
It's been a few years, and it's been a long day.
The bus ride scene felt very organic, and I especially liked the bit where that girl who looked like Switch unintentionally messed with his head. It was such a swift change to the atmosphere that it was starting to warm up for Kudai and these student heroes who look up to him, that it really helped me to feel at least a little bit of whiplash that he must have experienced in that moment. I also really liked the rude girl for the story dynamic, as it's been a while since we've seen someone to be ugly toward Kudai for no other reason than their preconceived notions about him, i.e. the media and Monoma. And it was especially intriguing to see it coming from within a group that has every reason to admire someone like him.
Yeah, like you see it all the time, like especially in politics. Like you'll see people who either worship the ground that a famous person walks on, or just absolutely demonize them because they have a different ideal system. Like, and I'm not here to get into politics, especially in the current political climate, but it is something that we deal with in our daily lives, and
That's just human nature.
Yeah, it's human nature. You know, like I decided not to, and this is gonna sound weird for me, but I decided not to explore for myself why does this girl dislike him so much. Like,
because you don't need to know. There's always people like that. You can't make everybody happy.
Exactly. I'm like, I don't want to know, because Kurai and the others are not going to take the time of day to figure out what's this girl's damage.
You don't need to.
Like you hear a little bit about it where it's just like, people like him don't care about people like us. Okay, should I care about every single person?
And I think the great thing about the craft too is that when you're doing little details of world building, write them, and maybe you intend it to be an Easter egg later on, and maybe you don't. And I think that's what makes it interesting when you're reading stories, because you're like, oh, okay, this one little random detail, why did they mention that? You know, is it something that's important, or is it just like, does it add to the layers of emotion that we're feeling right now?
It's just kind of exploring the world.
But the nice thing is you can do that as a writer, and then maybe you'll revisit it, maybe you won't. Maybe it's just a fleeting thing that no one's going to remember, right? Yeah. And so it just, I don't know. That's just me. I don't know. Yeah. One bit that made me laugh, and I'm honestly not really sure why, was when Kudai point blank reminded everyone why people hate his family. I know that he was doing a good thing and defending someone who really had no right to it, but the way he did it just struck me as funny, especially when he basically told Mina that he was just trying to avoid getting into another argument with her. I don't think that part of the scene was written to be funny, but it was, at least to me.
I mean, I didn't write it to be funny, but I can see how it would come across that way.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's just the quirkiness of having a relationship with somebody that's just no pun intended, but that's just how it is. It'd be funny. It's funny. Yeah. Side note, Big Brother Kudai bragging on his protege and being ready to strangle some guy because they were checking out Eri after he did absolutely sent me, because the way the story has been, and even who she is and where she comes from, I seriously doubt that this kind of thing has ever crossed her mind, but it stands to reason that she would stand out in a way among that demographic. I can see Kudai standing behind those two guys with the classic anime "know your place, trash" look on his face, just like I can see like the black smoke and the mean angry eyes just looming. I love it. Yeah. See Izumi Curtis. Yes, and Oliver Armstrong for reference. Absolutely. Olivier Armstrong. That is that is exactly what I was picturing before I read it.
That's amazing.
We share the same brain cell. Whoever you are, Silikita.
All right. My goodness.
Akarui and Hatsume are cooking. We finally get to see what they've been working on. Please show me what these mad child geniuses have been cooking.
Give us like 20 minutes.
Oh my god. Side note, again, how many fires have the two of them started? Has the amount gone up or down since they started collaborating full time?
The amount of fires has gone down, but the severity of said fires has increased.
I was initially disappointed that we didn't get to see Shinzo among the other hero course applicants in this chapter, but then I remembered that A, he's not the type to voluntarily get chummy with anyone he sees in competition, and B, he has less significant interactions with Class A in this canon. Yep. That said, it's nice to see that you haven't forgotten these extra characters, as I found them interesting enough to look forward to their return. I do have to wonder if they'll be playing a role in the final arc like Shinzo did in the original.
Hang on to that thought.
Tenya and Mina seem to be actually cool with one another at a long last, so I look forward to seeing how that affects their dynamics going forward, and not just with each other. Yeah. The class gathering scene started out as something that could be considered well-traveled ground, though the subject of discussion were different, so I give you that. The part with Deku, Todoroki, and Kudai talking about the different needs for heroes society was
Heroes by society.
Needs for heroes by society was of particular interest, as I've watched the Mr. Smiley episode and can certainly understand their frustration at being stuck on something that seems so trivial when compared with the devastation the others saw at the mountain. I know that the original canon, Deku was glad that he was able to get the villain in the end, but seeing as
Help the villain in the end.
Bro, just read it.
Okay. Deku was glad that he was able to help the villain in the end, but seeing as he mainly became a hero because he wants to save people, I can see how it would tear him up to be unable to go and help with something like a landslide. Yeah, obviously you guys can tell, I really enjoyed that episode, but something that struck me that I just couldn't ignore while watching that episode was yes, this is hilarious. I'm sure that things like this happen in this world because there's just too many wacky people for there not to happen. But aren't there better things that these guys could be doing? Or at the very least, some of the sidekicks must see it that way, or some of the or probably Endeavor. The only reason Endeavor went after this guy was because he graffitied his house. So it became personal for Endeavor. Originally he was approached about it, and he's just you're having a problem with the street artist? He's for crying out loud, it's a street artist. Come on. He was very dismissive of it.
Yeah.
But once the stakes became personal, that's when Endeavor got involved with it, which is kind of childish. But, that's how a lot of abusive people are. They're just children they're big children who never grew up. In any case, because I couldn't let that thought go, that was one of the big reasons why I created this mini arc. Because I was like, okay, there are probably more severe things going on while this is happening. Okay, cool. They need to get this guy. He's a criminal. Put him in jail. All that. I get it. But what if there's a mountain collapse or a bad pileup with a lot of fatalities?
Disaster.
Natural disaster or a man-made one. So yeah. I just couldn't let that thought go, so one of the main contributing factors to this mini arc was that.
Nice.
Let's see. All Might is getting healthy again. I love it. What I did not love was how the scene following that made me feel. It was a great scene. It had all the conflicting interests and emotions, and it was a great turn for the story to take. But if this is the tone setter for the next part of the story, then I'm scared. Yeah.
There have been discussions about potentially changing the rating. We'll see.
Fair warning. This story may be getting increased to rated M for just for violence. Just for violence,
not for language or sexual stuff or anything.
Yeah,
but
purely
potentially for the violence.
Yeah.
We'll see. It's implied. To me, it's implied, so it's not horrible.
Yeah.
But Joe's feeling it's. It's a little heavy.
I mean, I don't know. Some of the descriptions start getting a little more.
Yeah, it's still for me, it's not that. It's not super graphic. But.
All right. We'll cross that bridge when we get to it. Let's see. I knew what the teachers had to be coming in to talk about. I knew it was going to be a bad time for the kids. I knew those things, and even still, the narrative red flags gave me chills. Aizawa apologizing, Crow coming in completely sober, no smile at all from All Might, Akarui absolutely losing it. That just goes to reinforce in my mind how bad things are probably about to get. I think things are going to somehow turn out worse for the heroes than they did in the original canon, following the battle of the first battle in the war. Maybe I'm overreacting, but I feel like you didn't give us this many red flags even when you were lining up for Kudai's death. I didn't think about that. I'm gonna have to ask for a red flag count because I'm I don't know. I feel like I gave more. I feel like I put more effort into the red flags leading up to Kudai's death.
You were more intentional about sneaking them in, though. They weren't as.
They were more scattered, I think, is what it was.
Yeah.
This one's it's a lot of them within a very short amount of time.
Yeah.
I started dropping hints and stuff of Umbra, you know, earlier on. Like even as far back as the humorized bit, and like when that thing first got started, and now we're starting to see it happen more and more often. But yeah, interesting thought. Let's see. Will things end up being worse than they did in the original canon? You're gonna have to wait and see. Speaking of seeing him grasping at straws and trying to figure out anything he could about Umbra and his motives definitely felt like something new for his character. The closest thing I can think of is when he suspected his dad of being in All for One's pocket, but even then he was upset, not desperate to this degree. Maybe there was another time and I'm just not remembering. But I don't think he panicked like this even when they had to face off against Nine and company.
I think the only place I really saw him panic was when they were on Island.
No, I would say he got more pissed than panicked when he was on Island.
I felt like he had a moment where he got freaked out.
He kind of got freaked because of Akarui.
No, I meant Akarui.
Oh, Akarui.
Not Kudai.
I think so. On this last paragraph, he was talking about the red flags line for Kudai's death, so I'm assuming that's who he's talking about.
Oh, okay.
I mean, we can talk about both of them. Yeah, Akarui definitely was freaking out on Island. Like that's probably when we've seen him the closest to losing his composure. For Kudai, if that's who he's addressing, the time that I'm thinking of when we've seen him really panic was when they were fighting moonfish in this forest. And he was like already half blind and they're all running on fumes. Yeah. And he's trying to figure out how do we all get out of this alive. Like Nine, there wasn't a whole lot of him being scared when they had to fight Nine. Yeah, I'm trying to think back on when he's actually like been like afraid enough to where it interferes or like messes with how he's acting.
I don't know.
I'll have to think. I'd have to think a little bit longer on that one. Let's see. Moving on to the next part of the review. It could also be that this is the first time we see both of the Hikari brothers panicking at the same time and in the same place.
I think that's more realistic.
Okay, yeah.
Because usually one of them is kind of holding it together while the other one's having their freak out. Yeah. So that sounds more likely to me.
That's funny. Up to now, if one of them has been worked up over something, then the other works to calm them down. But this time, it's like they're feeding off of one another's fear, which is disconcerting on its own. I know that there's the promise between the two of them at the end there, but I don't know. Seems like things are about to get worse for a long time before they get better. Can neither confirm nor deny. Moving on. Especially with that preview, Akarui, don't you do it. Don't you dare do the self-sacrifice play. We've had enough of that from your family. I await the next chapter with great trepidation. Oh, man. There are so many things about to happen that I want to talk about.
You could just record 2 chapters.
I'm not going to do... No.
It could just be a sorry for being late.
Not going to do that.
Why?
Because...
Because why? I want to know.
Because I'm committed to trying to release stuff 2 weeks apart, and me being sick means that I have to do catch up, but I'm not going to double down.
But why?
Because I need to make sure that I have content prepared in advance.
My guy?
What? Well, if I just release everything that I have at this moment...
release everything you have. I said release 2 chapters because I'm impatient, and these particular chapters are like a lot.
Yeah.
And I want to watch the insanity unfold.
All right. We've got one more reviewer, Ethan Curious. We haven't seen him in a minute.
Yeah. Hey, bud.
What's up? Let's see. Ethan starts off by saying, "You were not kidding when you told me years ago that you weren't holding anything back as far as the messed up stuff in My Hero Academia was concerned. I'm sorry I tapped out and kind of skipped to here, but it got a tad depressing, and while I am invested enough to bear interest in where how it's headed, not enough to go through the parts I missed. As much as I was excited to realize that Kudai was about to meet Todoroki's mom, I probably shouldn't be surprised that you split the story up since it hit over 100 last I recall, unless I'm mistaken. You're not mistaken. In fact, like by the time it hit chapter 100, I had a couple of people in the Discord that I run telling me, it's like, hey man, the length of this story is kind of ridiculous. This might be a little easier to follow if you break it up. So I took their advice and I broke it into smaller bite-sized pieces. Let's see. I guess you are upping the ante a bit from canon. As far as I know, there was never any such order to kill there, but yeesh. Still messed up. Yeah, in canon, they just had orders to defeat, if some villains got killed in the process, they were definitely out to kill Shigaraki because they just knew that he's too dangerous to take in alive. And if villains got killed, whatever, but they weren't necessarily going in there with orders to to decimate.
Yeah.
There's a big difference between invading force and exterminate with extreme prejudice.
Yeah.
That's we're talking like scorched earth tactics here. Let's see. Even Ruby was more upfront with its characters about the danger, Ozpin's secrets notwithstanding. Yeah, I remember that being a thing. Let's see. Good quality chapter. The prose is solid as always. Emotions also run the gamut. That's funny. I appreciate the... Let's see. The prose is solid as always. I appreciate you saying that. Gamut. That's a word I haven't seen in a very long time.
I love these guys because I think every time we go through reviews, there's somebody who brings up a word I haven't heard in a hot minute. So thank you.
Yes. Yeah. That's awesome. Well, guys, thank you very much for your reviews. I will go ahead and let the audio chapter play. More interesting stuff is going to be happening in this one. I'm excited to talk about it. So, be back in a bit.
Alrighty.
So, here we go. What was in my past brought me to the end. I was stuck in limbo, hoping to be dead wrong. No, they took everything from me. Nothing left to see, burning down slowly. Can't bury the truth, but past is far from dead. The chances we lose when we chose never to forget. When choices made, headphones the blade. The taste of blood was the beginning of the end. Beginning of the end.
Resolved. Not so long ago, the students of Class 1A had the collective thought that there were few things more suffocating than the silence of many people in a room, simply being there without a sound between them. That same sensation was threatening to choke many of them now, even hours after their teachers left them with the promise that if any of them needed to talk, they would make themselves available immediately, regardless of the hour. Akarui had also left, saying that there were still some things he needed to work on before the war was officially declared to the public. There had been many tears shed and viciously impotent grumblings from many of the young heroes following the news that they were to become human weapons. But all such noises faded away into a deathly quiet that left the atmosphere in the lounge heavy with dread and despair. Even Bakugo, the most violence-prone of the bunch, looked as though he were trying to pin down some unseen demon with the force of his gaze alone. Eventually, it was Kurai who decided to stir in his seat next to Mina and break the silence. "Do any of you blame me for this?" he asked abruptly, his eyes remaining unfocused and dead in their sockets as he posed the question. There were several sounds of shifting fabric in the room as the others turned toward him before Bakugo was the one to growl out, "It ain't always about you, Hogosha." "Even if we did find some reason to hold you accountable, what good would that do us?" Weiss added from next to him, her hard-lined face looking positively imperial as she spoke. "Really, do you have to air such stupid questions that come to you?" "It's not a stupid question!" Kurai snarled as he shot to his feet, knocking his chair over backwards and startling Mina into recoiling away from him as she looked up to see his strained, pale features. His body was back to shaking like it had been when they first learned the terrible news as he clenched his fists and growled out, "This Umbra guy is targeting me, and he's using all of you to do it like you're all just pieces on a board game! If you hadn't what? Izuku now shouted, surprising his friend as he cut him off and stood so that they were only a couple of feet apart from one another. If you hadn't become our friend, then this would all be different. Do you want to tell the people that you've saved that you regret doing it because of one insane villain? Kachan is right, Kurai. This really isn't about you. We're all being played by a puppet master, and there's no guarantee that they wouldn't be doing this to us if you weren't in the picture. Stop trying to take the blame for what's out of your control. You're a hero like no other, Kurai, Ochako said resolutely as she stood alongside her boyfriend, looking every bit as angry as he was. This is awful what's happening, but it's not your fault. None of us here regret having you in our lives. We probably wouldn't even have lives if not for you, Todoroki added firmly as he stood up from the couch where he, Yayorozu, and Jiro had been commiserating. It should go without saying that we all owe you a debt that cannot be repaid. To lay the blame for this atrocity on your shoulders would be wrong, because you have only been a hero that the world needs. They're all right. You've done nothing wrong, the creative heroine said as she looked at her friend with sad eyes. This person could have just as easily picked another target to use as an excuse for whatever vendetta they created for themselves, and it would be no more their fault than yours. We're all stuck in this, Kirishima said as he slammed his fist together hard enough to make sparks fly. But that means that we're with you until the end of the line. I don't know for sure about everyone else, but I'll bet they'll tell you that we're going into this alongside you, not because we're going to be forced to, but because we made up our minds to follow you. You've trusted all of us with the secrets of One for All, Tenya said as he approached his oldest friend who was continuing to shake with the weight of the blame he felt he needed to carry. You trusted us to share in your burdens, Kurai. Trust us to help you with this one. Help me, Kurai laughed hoarsely. How are you guys supposed to help me with this when none of you can help yourselves out of this situation? They're not saying they can help you get out of what's coming, Eri said as she approached the distraught boy, a look of somber sympathy on her face. But speaking from personal experience, fighting a war alongside people who have your back no matter what is much more preferable to fighting it on your own. So misery loves company. The guardian hero laughed again, looking even more distressed than before. That's basically what you're telling me, right? Sorry, but based on what Akarui was telling us, it's just about the only comfort we can give to one another. His successor replied with a sad smile. I wish that I could just rewind this problem away for all of you. But even if I turn back the hands of time again, there's no way that I could find Umbra in time to stop him from enacting his plan, if he's as good as Akarui says he is. Nor should you, Kurai told her with a slow shake of his head and a visible shudder. The vestiges said as much, but that kind of power is too much for any person to wield sensibly. As awful as this is going to be, we shouldn't be playing gods. That would be an even worse crime than Umbra's. Wait a sec, Kaminari said as he held up his hands in a pause motion. You're saying that Eri could reverse time again so that she could at least have time to look for Umbra, or maybe warn the right people to watch out for what he's doing before he actually does it, but you're not gonna? I didn't mean to turn back time, nor do I regret that it happened, Eri answered quickly, a severe look settling onto her face. But if I were to start doing it every time I deemed something to be wrong happen, that would basically be like taking away any real decision-making out of everyone's hands. I'd rob people of their free will, something that everyone is born with and has a right to, and that is something neither I nor the vestiges can abide by. There was another tense silence following those words before Blake finally said, You do realize that by refusing to go back again, you're essentially enabling the war that's about to happen and all the deaths that will come about as a result of it? Blake! Kurai snapped, his rage sparking One for All into action for a brief second, and causing those nearby to flinch and retreat a couple of paces on reflex. That's like saying she's responsible for every death that happens around her because she has the power to rewind people back to their prime when they're about to die, but she doesn't. That was too far. Big difference between people dying when it's their time and people being cut down in a war, she replied without blinking. It won't just be villains that we're killing. Innocent people will be caught up in the crossfire. Then we'll do what we can to save those people, Todoroki declared. We may be about to get thrown into a battle with rules that we never agreed to, but that doesn't mean that we need to abandon the ideals that led us to where we are today. If we fight the villains, we will do what we have to. If we find innocent people who have nothing to do with it at all, then we'll save them. Orders to kill the members of the front or not, I will be a hero. There was a brief moment of quiet before Tenya turned toward his friend and said, Well spoken, Todoroki. To the others he added, He's right. We are about to suffer a horrible ordeal. People will no doubt lose faith in their heroes and the government because of what we will be made to do. But it is our duty to carry on regardless.
It is nothing less than our responsibility to stand our ground and take on all the problems that the innocents of our country cannot shoulder, no matter what they may be, no matter how terrible the burden. This is just... It's not fair. Hagakure sniffled miserably. I don't want to kill anybody, villain or not. Life isn't fair, Kurai murmured almost to himself. Before he could speak again, Izuku finished for him by reciting, "It's a hero's job to combat that unfairness." The two bearers of One for All locked gazes for a moment before nodding grimly in a silent agreement. Those are nice words and all, Blake said through narrowed eyes, but it doesn't change our situation. Even if we somehow make it through the war without killing anyone ourselves, anyone we bring down who's associated with the front is probably going to be executed in the aftermath. We know that, Mina said sharply, her words cutting like acid at the other girl. Bringing it up over and over again isn't going to change anything about our situation, so do us all a favor and cut it out with the pity party, Belladonna. Stop blaming Eri for not taking the easy way out. Matter of fact, you owe her an apology. Mina, don't, Eri said before the pink girl could start on a rant. She has a right to be frustrated with my decision, even if that won't change it. If this is what she needs to start working through her anger, I don't hold it against her. You don't get it, Blake said as she shook her head in frustration. There is no working through the kind of anger and despair that comes from being in a war. You do not have to tell me that, the horn girl replied with a sudden degree of sharpness in her voice that took everyone in the room by surprise. More than any of you, I've lived through the horrors of war. I've watched my loved ones walk out the door and never return. I saw them ripped to pieces right in front of me in the heat of battle. I've experienced rage and helplessness as I watched the entire world burn down around me, turning everything that my heroes worked for into ash. Even before that, I've lived through the hell of human experimentation and watching people being slaughtered every time I stepped over the lines Chisaki had drawn up for me. I've been helpless in the face of unspeakable horrors, so don't think that I don't understand what's about to happen and what I cannot bring myself to prevent. I am not the little girl living in the teacher's dorm right now. I am a hero who knows where to draw the line. By condemning us all to hell on earth in the process, the shadowy girl said through gritted teeth before she turned to walk away and stride toward the door. I'm going for a walk. Ruby started to go after her, only to have Yang put a hand on her shoulder and shake her head in a negative fashion. She won't run like last time, she assured the younger girl in a lowered tone. I'll talk to her tonight, but she just needs some time. There won't be enough time in all the world for us to be okay with what's about to happen, Ribbit, Asui croaked. Bakugo suddenly walked over to Kirishima and grabbed him by the back of his shirt, dragging him away as he growled, Come on, dumb hair, I need to hit something. And you're just volunteering me? The redhead shouted as he was pulled out the door in spite of his protests. Watching them go, Tokoyami also decided to stand, though unlike the others, he went toward the elevators that led up to their living quarters. I must meditate on these matters, he said over his shoulder. If anyone wishes to join me in the solace of darkness, you have but to knock on the entrance of my abode. Mind if I go with? Ojiro asked, which his classmate merely nodded in acceptance. Eri no Chako moved to talk with Izuku in lowered tones, prompting most of their friends to break apart into smaller groups, some even going off to be alone entirely. Mina took that moment to look at Kurai, and felt her heart sink as she saw how much he was trembling again. Hey, she said as gently as she could while she approached him from the side. What do you need right now? Time alone, with me, and maybe some of the guys? I think, he breathed out slowly as he clenched and unclenched his fists. I should probably be alone for a bit. I don't want to lash out at the wrong person just because of everything I'm thinking about at once. Okay. She nodded before giving his arm a firm squeeze. But once you're done with that, please come and get me. I know you need some time away, but I really need to have you close tonight. All right. I can do that, he promised her with a wobbly, forced grin. I'll be back before the sun goes down. Without any further hesitation, he made for the exit. As soon as he was outside, Mina watched him make a sharp turn and then disappear into the woods surrounding their home. She was so wrapped up in watching him go that she almost didn't notice Yayorozu coming to stand beside her with a solemn look on her face. Would you care to join Jiro Todoroki and me for some tea? She offered. I know it will take much more than that to ease our minds, but it can't hurt anything, can it? Mina only hesitated for a second before she gave her friend a weak smile and answered, Tea sounds great. I'm gonna grab some cookies to go with them, though. If there was ever a time for stress eating, this is it. Akarui stood in front of his personalized computer that he had set up in the support lab, his fingers clenching and unclenching around what looked like a high-tech pendant as he gritted his teeth with such pressure it was a wonder that his molars didn't crack. This is the only way, he thought while his body shook and his stomach churned violently. If things are about to get started when I think they are, Hatsuma, and I just don't have time to finish these designs like normal. I have to do this. His resolve did nothing to steady his raw nerves, nor could it quell the memories of the most hellish months of his young life. Even in spite of knowing that his plan would make the difference between life and death for his brother and their friends yet again, he couldn't stop his body from doing everything that it could to find another way. Anything that didn't involve subjecting it to the ultimate prison once again. You did it before, so do it again! He raged at himself while glaring at the pendant. Kurai literally gave his life for the sake of these people, so I have no business offering anything less. Even so, his hand refused to obey his order to activate the device that would give him the power to save the people he had come to care for. Have I become such a coward that I won't do what must be done when it matters the most? He thought as frustrated tears began to fall down his face. He was very tempted to call Ari and have her reverse the damage he was about to do to himself, but he knew that would be wrong. If I use this power, I have to accept the consequences. He growled silently as he pressed the pendant to his forehead. I told Kurai that I couldn't accept One for All because that kind of power shouldn't be wielded by someone like me, but isn't this basically the same thing? If I can have access to this ability without consequence whenever I choose, then how can I... For one of the very few times in his considerable memory, Akaru's thought process came to a complete stop. He pulled the pendant away from his face and stared at it, even as his gaze sharpened to a steely degree. If I can so easily abuse this gift of mine, then I don't deserve to have it, he decided. So I'll abuse it one last time and accept the consequence that is only right for me to suffer. Dropping the pendant onto the desk, he reached into his pocket and quickly selected Ari's phone number. He waited a few moments for her to pick up, and when she did, he wasted no time in saying, I need a favor. Can you come to the support lab ASAP? And don't tell anyone, especially Kurai, about it. After a brief moment of silence on his end, Akarui shook his head and replied, I'll explain when you get here. For now, I'll just say that I've got a harebrained idea that might just make the difference between half the people in your class going home in body bags and all of you making it out alive. Trick is, I need your help to pull it off. Kurai was sitting in a place on the school grounds not all that unfamiliar to him. There were trees that had been smashed to pieces all around him, a result of his senseless rampage a couple of months ago. He had taken to meditating on the spot whenever he needed time to clear his head, though he couldn't really explain why he preferred it over his room these days. Maybe it was because there were less chances of being disturbed out here, or maybe it had something to do with the fact that this was the place where Izuku and Mina had managed to talk him down and thusly made him feel more grounded in his mortal sense of self. If there were ever a time when I needed to remember what makes me who I am, this is it, he thought grimly as he closed his eyes and concentrated on regulating his shaky breaths. Even though his quirk no longer relied on his chakra centers, he felt it best to focus on each pool of spiritual energy in order to maintain the identity he had made for himself throughout his life. Today he would focus on maintaining the Vishuddha and Ajna chakras, his vision of the world around him, and of his own self. This war will change us, he thought after managing to calm his racing heart just a bit. There's no getting around that. We're going to see the absolute worst of humanity on a massive scale, and on both sides no less. He was under no illusions that every hero on their side was going to be a saint throughout what was to come. There would be those who would break and cower instead of doing their duty, and there would be those who would revel in the carnage and warfare as a whole, exposing the dark sides they kept hidden until now. I wonder how many villains will find hiding among us, thinking themselves the hero of the story. He had to wonder. In a way, the battle with the Paranormal Liberation Front was going to be the easiest part of what was to come. They were the bad guys, and they needed to go down, plain and simple. But the people who were left on the winning side, the ones who would take these circumstances as permission to vent their full power against their enemies without regard for the consequences, what would be done about them when the current government was held accountable for its decisions? Will this war exterminate the villains who stepped out of the shadows only to give birth to a new sect that operates in broad daylight with the approval of the people? Are you sure about this? Ochako asked Izuku, looking worried for him. They were sitting in his room, where he had just described a plan that could help everyone in their class survive, and maybe even keep their oaths to save the civilians who would be put in danger when the war came. We need to be able to protect everyone we can. He nodded as he continued to stare down at his scarred hands. Kurai and I can't be everywhere at once to save you guys if something goes wrong, especially if the front starts using Nomu like the ones he and Endeavor fought. There aren't many pros who can contend with that kind of power, but he and I can. And if I can make sure that all of you will be able to do the same, then I have to do it. Ochako looked into his earnest eyes, saw the pain that he was trying to hide behind his smile in them. His goals were noble, yes, but this plan could easily backfire and make things even worse for all of them instead of better, and he well knew it. He was about to take a huge risk with the gift that his best friend had given him, but he was convinced that it was the right thing to do. That meant that he would stand by his decision, even if the others cursed him or called him a fool, like many had throughout his entire life. Because that's who Deku was. Driven by impulse, Ochako leaned her head forward and kissed the brunette, prompting a muffled squawk of alarm from him, though he didn't pull away either. After a few seconds, she pulled back and pressed her forehead to his and whispered, "If you think this is the right thing to do, then I'll have your back the whole way. You're a hero, through and through." Opening her eyes and leaning back a little, she couldn't help but smile when she saw how starstruck he appeared in that moment, leading her to add, "You're my hero, Izuku. I believe you're going to do what you've always done before this is all over and save everyone." "Thank you," he said with a shaky voice before she pulled him in for a tight hug that he reciprocated. Had anyone been passing by the outside of the room at that time, they might have been intrigued by the green light that flared from behind the seams in the closed entrance, though it quickly faded away. Kurai felt, rather than saw, the sun begin to go down as he started to rouse himself from his meditative state. The air had been cool throughout his time in isolation, but not unpleasantly so. Now he could feel his body beginning to shiver, so even without opening his eyes, he knew that it was nearing time for him to return to Mina. Sure enough, when he allowed his eyes to register the fading light around him, he could see that the sky had turned to orange and gold, and there was hardly a cloud in sight. It almost seemed wrong for the sky to look so lovely, he thought, with such ominous tidings on the horizon. I guess nature doesn't care much about what we do or don't do, he reflected as he got to his feet, moving slowly so that he didn't stress the muscles that had been locked in place for some hours now. Even quirks that can change aspects of it don't last for long, and then the world continues to spin on as it always does. So if it wants to look its best on the dawn of a new war, it can well do as it pleases. Shaking his head with a snort, he took a moment to laugh at himself, waxing poetic like some philosopher of old. I can't even come up with something all that profound, he reflected wryly. Anyone could have told anybody else that same thought. How do you do that? Hachak! He swore as lightning enveloped him while he leaped away from the source of the voice, who seemingly materialized out of nowhere. Blake! He gasped once he recognized the speaker. You're gonna kill... He stopped himself partway into the sentence before he realized what he was saying, and more importantly, who he was saying it to. Sorry, that was in poor taste, he said as he allowed the dark energy to dissipate. The American girl, meanwhile, had her eyes cast downward as she made the subdued reply, It's not your fault. I shouldn't have surprised you like that. I'm more embarrassed at not knowing that you were there than anything. He panted as his body shook with his unfortunately familiar tremors, trying to work the adrenaline out of his system through measured breathing once again. Guess I've started relying on danger sense more than my own senses to pay attention to what's going on around me. I need to work on that. There you go again, she said, her tone still somewhat bitter. How can you do that? Stay so positive when we're about to be put through hell. You think I'm being positive? Kurai snorted, a hint of laughter breaking through as he did. I have no idea where you got that idea, but most of my positivity comes from Mina, and she's got no positivity about our situation. All of this is just me doing what I can to keep my crap together and not have a repeat of December. He made a vague gesture to the clearing around them as he added, I did all of this, you know. Didn't really do me any good. So you just laugh at the situation instead? She asked as she leveled a frown on him. That almost comes across as you not taking this seriously. That smile was wiped away from Kurai's face in favor of a dark glare that preceded the words, Don't talk to me about taking a situation seriously. I've taken life to protect innocent people before, and I've seen the kind of things that my predecessors had to do in order to continue the fight against All for One throughout the ages. I don't know where you get off on telling Ari and I what these powers are supposed to be used for, but if all you're going to do is condemn us... You're not the only one who's killed people, Kurai! She suddenly yelled as she locked her golden eyes onto his, stunning him into silence. Wait. What? He asked once his brain had a moment to compute what he was being told. I'm gonna assume this isn't the Chimera villain that we're talking about. He had been told of the fate that befell the monstrous villain during his fight with Team Ruby, but his instincts told him there was more to this outburst. This was confirmed when Blake's eyes welled up with tears before she hung her head and shook it in a negative motion. He felt a chill go through him as he was forced to ask, What happened? She tried to get out before she turned away and made to run, only to be stopped in place by a strand of black whip that attached to her back and refused to be dislodged. Refusing to even look over her shoulder, she begged, Please let me go. You really expect me to do that after what you just told me? He said in a sharp tone that made her flinch. You don't just drop something like that and then try to duck out, especially after what you've said to Ari and me today. I deserve an explanation. Please don't make me do that, she pleaded with him, though she still refused to look his way. I don't want to relive that part of my life. Blake, I got the truth out of my own mother about my quirk, which took some doing. He answered, a slight growl in his throat. You really think I'm the one to give up when pursuing a hard truth? You put your mom in jail, she shouted as she strained against the whip, failing to notice how Kurai flinched at her accusation. Even if you won't be able to do the same to me, I don't want to look at you and see hatred. Kurai's strength increased and he forced Blake to turn back toward him before he said, This time in your life, does the rest of your team know about it? The girl did not meet his gaze, but she nodded in affirmation. Seeing it, the young hero let out a long sigh before he said, If they know and accept you as you are, then I really don't have a cause to treat you any differently, do I? Tell me what the hell you're trying to avoid, and stop making things so difficult for me to understand already. I will get it out of Ruby and Yang if I have to. To make his point, he allowed Black Whip to dissipate before saying, You really pissed me off today, Blake. But that doesn't mean that I'm going to hate you. I already tried that kind of thing with Ida before you guys came along, and I gotta say it didn't go well for either of us. The girl was so quiet and still that for a moment Kurai started to wonder if she hadn't switched out with one of her shadows, but then she drew in a deep, shuddering breath before asking, What do you want me to tell you? Narrowing his eyes in response, the boy replied, Tell me why you've been talking about war like you've already lived through one. Have you ever heard about the White Fang? They're some kind of terrorist quirk supremacy group, right? He asked. They attacked Second Amendment around the same time as the USJ incident, if what Yang has said is correct. They weren't really attacking the school, she told him as her shoulders shook. They were after me. You? Kurai inquired. Why? Deep underground, in a cell that had never been touched by the light of day, a solitary woman sat in silence as she had every day for years. Her memories continued to taunt her the same way that they had for years longer, each passing of the images more depressing and oppressive than the last. No one ever came to visit this place, and the other inmates knew better than to approach someone with her capabilities and track record. With nothing to stimulate her mind, the door to her cell may as well not even been locked, for all she cared. She was trapped in her own personal Tartarus. So, it was nothing less than a surprise when the slot in her door that normally granted access to her meals allowed a small brown package to pass through without a word from the guard on the other side. Her eyes narrowed, already having a pretty good idea as to who had sent the package and even what it might contain. Knowing what she did, it was very tempting to just shove it back out and forget that it had even come to her. However, she also knew that things could get worse for her if she ignored the parcel. She wasn't entirely sure how they could get worse, but her former employers were powerful and resourceful. There were very few things that they couldn't do. With a slight grunt and swift movements, she moved to the door and picked up the packet, tearing open the paper and pulling out what looked like a burner phone. She maintained her suspension of surprise when it began to buzz the second she had it in her hand, especially given that the number was blocked. With a small sigh, she accepted the call and immediately said, Shove the offer up your ass. I'm not interested in doing your dirty work again. I'm not who you think I am. A distorted and garbled voice replied, the alteration somehow serving to make the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end. In fact, you and I, Lady Nagant, happen to have a common enemy. Shaking off the momentary displeasure, Tsutsumi narrowed her eyes and formed the reply, A lot of people have a common enemy with me. Doesn't mean I should listen to whatever you have to say. True, a common enemy is not enough of a reason for someone in your situation to hear out an offer, which is why I have a couple of other reasons why you should. The voice told her, continuing to set her teeth on edge with how twisted it sounded. Firstly, my capabilities exceed that of your former employers, as evidenced by me smuggling something so coveted as a phone into Tartarus' max security section. Seen any of your cellmates with one of these? The former heroine narrowed her eyes again before she admitted, No. Of course, such a gesture doesn't mean much to you, now does it? The voice went on. It's an impressive flex, but it's not enough of a reason for you to hear me out. So I'll go ahead and tell you that Yuto Hisaki is dead, and I'm the one who made it happen. When all that Tsutsumi gave them in reply was silence, the speaker chuckled and said, I see that I have your attention now. So how would you like a job that pays with the one currency I know you'll be interested in? If you're about to offer a get-out-of-jail-free card, that won't be enough, the inmate muttered. People on the outside won't want anything from me other than to return right to the cell, and no matter who you are, I doubt that you have the ability to change the minds of the masses enough for them to accept me with open arms after everything the Commission will have told them about me. With open arms. The voice laughed again, making her scalp prickle with dread. Perhaps not. But your freedom from Tartarus is more of a fringe benefit. My offered payment comes at little cost to me because it already happened to fall under the criteria of my endgame. And just what is your endgame, whoever you are? My apologies, the voice responded. For obvious reasons, you won't be learning my real name, but you can call me Umbra. Umbra, she repeated, her brow furrowing even harder than before. What are you, some new flunky for all for one? You mistake me for a traditional villain. Umbra answered with what Tsutsumi assumed was a grin, even in spite of the voice filter. I'm on the side of Japan's society, if you can believe it. My endgame sees the Heroes Public Safety Commission taking responsibility for their crimes and the minions of All for One paying for theirs. And when the dust settles, people will learn, at least for a little while, not to put their faith in politicians who smile and promise a life without worries. This time, it didn't take long for Lady Nagant to form a reply. Who's the mark? She asked in a deadpan as she looked down at her arm. After all, there was only one reason a client would be going to such lengths to contract someone like her in a place like Tartarus. A kid named Kurahikari, the voice answered. He's the rising star of our country, the next All Might, some might say. But before you lock and load, he's something of a special case, even for a marksman of your caliber. So I want you to pay special attention to what I say next. You want my attention, Umbra? You have it. Well, ladies and gentlemen, this truly has been a pleasure, said a man in a white trench coat as he gave a sweeping bow with a bowler hat in hand. As he straightened himself up in front of Shigaraki's lieutenants, he flipped the hat and set it back on top of his bright orange hair while narrow green eyes twinkled in delight. I'll see to it that your inventories are well stocked, just in time for your grand ambitions to be unveiled. We're paying you a fortune, and you're telling us you'll only have things ready at the last minute? Spinner demanded with no small measure of irritation. Well, as I'm sure your good friend Redestro can tell you, timing is everything in matters such as these, the well-dressed arms dealer said with a slick smile. If I were to start moving the merch now, word would get out, then the heroes would come looking. I'm sure that's something you'd all rather avoid, now wouldn't you? By that logic, why should we trust you to get what we need when the time does come? Inquired Skeptic with a sneer. Perhaps we should trust someone less sloppy to get the job done. Why, Skeptic, you wound me. Their newest ally replied with another sleazy grin. I thought that someone with your attention to detail would surely be able to understand why I intend to do things the way that I do. There's no way for Torchwick to move that much black market equipment without raising some red flags no matter when he does it, said Dobby, his blue eyes practically glowing from beneath his black hair. If a hero gets onto us and raises the alarm before Shigaraki is ready, we're going to be hard-pressed to accomplish our goals within the time frame we prefer. At this, their guest nodded with something like approval before saying, It appears that your flames aren't the only bright thing about you. Yes, as you say, moving my things now would throw quite the wrench into moving your things along, but if you are all patient, good things are bound to head your way, I'm sure. If we move right, we might even be able to set a trap for some of the heroes who have been looking for us, said Twice in a lowered tone before sitting up straight in his chair and flashing Torchwick a big thumbs up. You're the row man for getting us all that stuff. Thanks a bunch. While the villain's colleagues gave vent to their own sounds of annoyance, Torchwick flashed another smile and gave a flourished bow to the masked man. As I said, it's my pleasure to assist such distinguished individuals realize such grandiose ambitions. He then moved as if he were about to leave, but he was surprised then by the appearance of a girl with half-pink, half-brown hair and eyes that matched. Nia, my dear, he exclaimed in delight, startling the lieutenants who had started to talk among themselves and completely missed her entrance. Were you able to secure our goodwill offering for our newest clients? The girl nodded and handed him a piece of paper wrapped around a data drive before performing a fluid spin that landed her next to Torchwick, staring at Shigaraki's henchman with an unnervingly silent smile. None of them seemed happy about this development, but it was Compress who voiced their collective thoughts. Just who is this child? He demanded. We told you, Torchwick. Only you were to come to this meeting. Apologies, sir, but where I go, so does my dear Neo, Roman replied as he quickly scanned the paper that she had brought before turning to look at the council once again. She is my better half, you see. Without her, I would not be so capable in delivering what I promise, and more, provided the mood strikes me. In fact, I think you'll be quite pleased to have her among us once you realize what she has to say. As he said this, the heterochromic girl performed a quick curtsy while maintaining her blank smile, which was starting to get under the skin of the lieutenants. You said something about a goodwill offering, Trumpet muttered as he eyed the paper in Torchwick's gloved hand. What do you have for us? A little advance warning, you might say, Roman answered as Neo then tossed him a cane when she began to twirl lazily. It seems that the Heroes Public Safety Commission is already on to the threat that you all pose to their society, which means that they've decided to bring the pain. They know of our plans? Skeptic asked with a twitch in his finger. They have some idea of what you're on about, but don't you fret. Roman grinned a little more brightly. They have no idea of where you all are, nor the exact numbers you possess, though it would seem they have discovered you're a much bigger organization than the League of Villains. What do you mean when you say bring the pain? Cinder inquired with narrowed eyes. If the Commission knows we pose such a threat, what do they intend to do about it? This will be made public later this week, but the Commission has apparently decided that you all merit the same treatment as an invading militant force from another country. The arms dealer replied as he stopped spinning his cane and planted the butt firmly on the tiles in front of him. Just in case I need to spell it out for some of you, this means the government is going to throw not only the army at you, but a legion of heroes with the authority and expectation to kill you and your people on sight. There was a good 3 seconds of silence before, somewhat predictably, Twice reacted. What the hell? He demanded. That's supposed to be our thing. They can't just tell people to kill us like that. I wonder if Stain had an idea about the Commission being able to do such a thing. Spinner said in an aside to Dobby, who merely grunted as he put his chin in his folded hands. The former members of the Meta Liberation Army looked at one another with some measures of apprehension. This could prove devastating to morale once word gets out, Trumpet told Redestra, who was gripping his own hands tightly. If we do not handle this correctly, we will have deserters and even traitors who defect to the enemy in exchange for asylum. He muttered, his skin beginning to darken, despite his best effort to the contrary. This is an unexpected move from the HPSC. It's far too bold and direct. Now, why all the fuss? Roman called out before arguments could begin. Spin this right, you just might find that you can recruit even more of the common folk and heroes to your side of things. This is an opportunity, people. It seemed that this was enough to regather the attention of the lieutenants, because the room went quiet while Compress asked, You have a plan to deal with this? I have an idea, nothing more. Roman replied readily as he began to twirl his cane once again. I leave the planning and grand schemes to folks such as yourselves, you know. But I'll throw you a bone for the sake of our contract. No money to be made from clients who back out, right? Get to the point before I cut you up, Toga hissed as she drew one of her knives. You've been boring me this whole Her words were cut off as she suddenly felt cold steel pressed against the soft flesh of her neck, right where her jugular ran beneath her skin. Ladies, Roman said in a placating tone as Neo crumbled into something like blackened glass shards beside him, much to the surprise of his clients. There's no need for threats, I assure you. I may take some time to get to the main points of my presentation, but what's a sales pitch without a little flair? Bearable, Dobby said curtly as he looked at Toga from the corner of his eye, who was currently being held by Neo via one of her hair buns with a slender sword pressed to her neck, though not quite hard enough to break the skin. When she had first entered the room, he had been certain he could turn both her and her boss into ash without much difficulty, but now he wasn't so sure. If she can outdo Toga at stealth, she might just be the more dangerous of the two, he thought as he noticed Roman beginning to speak again. Your whole ideology is based on the fact that people should be free to use their quirks however they want, right? The man said as he spread his arms out to either side. Well, now that the government is doubling down on you, why not do the same to them? How hard would it be for skilled orators such as Trumpet and Redestro to inform the people of this tyranny in a way that stirs them back to take what has been rightfully denied them for so long? Play your cards right. You'll not only have an army fighting for freedom, but for their very birthrights. Done speaking, he clicked his fingers and rested his hands atop his cane, which he returned to the floor. As soon as he had, Neo slid back into view alongside him, though her smile was gone. There was a crumbling sound, and then Toga was free to move, though she settled for glaring at Neo while making a show of sheathing her dagger. You better watch yourself, Torchwick, she warned the pair. Your little doll won't always be around to watch your back, and that's the day that my knife will be sticking out of it. Neo and Roman, instead of looking irate or even mildly displeased, merely smiled at the blonde girl before he replied, Well, as scary as that is, I believe I've done my part and then some. This concludes our business for today. I'll be sure to contact you once everything is ready to move out. Neo then made a sweeping bow, much like Roman had done only moments prior, and then the pair crumbled into shards, leaving behind a council of lieutenants that was equal parts frustrated and contemplative. Even if he's an insufferable dick, he does have a good point about how we can use this. Dobby mused to himself as he glanced at Cinder from the other corner of his eye, who tapped her finger twice on the table, prompting him to nod almost imperceptibly. And with any luck, Cinder will be able to take care of the enemy's greatest asset before the war really gets started. A lone figure stood in the garage of a well-respected hospital complex, where the public knew several doctors of varying practices worked to better the lives of those who could see them. Most of these physicians were strewn about the concrete and on the posh cars that occupied the area, and not all of them were in one piece. The figure himself had just taken a handkerchief from one of the corpses and was using it to free his sword from the contents of his victims, a long, straight blade belonging to a forging style that was rarely seen in Japan. He was dressed in a red cloak that obscured most of his features, beneath which was a black garb, both of which made it easier to hide stubborn bloodstains in a pinch. He took his time cleaning the weapon, safe in the knowledge that even if someone were to come in and see him in the VIP parking section, they would have no recollection of it moments later. He had just finished his task when a phone began to buzz in his pocket, which prompted him to sheath his blade and answer the call. "It's done," Shadow said without preamble. "There won't be any black market organ transfers happening here for quite some time. What's next?" "We've just received intel that Hawks may be compromised," said a woman's voice on the other end. "It's not a sure thing, but we need a contingency in the event that he fails to take care of his targets." "Primary target?" the cloaked youth inquired. "Bubaigawara Jean," his handler replied, "otherwise known as Twice from the League of Villains. He's currently working with the Meta Liberation Army, so if Hawks' cover is blown, you will need to get in and eliminate the threat that he poses." "Dead or alive?" "Alive would be preferable, but only if you're certain that he won't be able to use his quirk," the woman ordered. "Don't risk your life or Hawks's unnecessarily, understand? If it comes down to it, kill Twice without hesitation. We'll have other sources to interrogate when all is said and done." "Understood." The swordsman nodded, even though his handler could not see him. "When should this be done by?" "There will be a massive battle taking place at the end of March," she told him. "It would be best if he disappeared shortly before then, or at the very beginning of the proceedings. His death and our involvement will be much easier to obscure in the chaos of war. And in the meantime, continue your search for the trigger bomb." There's a brief pause before she went on to say, "If you have your own leads to run down on your side project, you are free to do so at this time. But understand that when we call you back into action, you will go the instant the order is given." "Don't worry about that." The cloaked figure grinned. "I've tied up all my loose ends, so there's nothing to stand between me and my work from now on." "Already?" His handler sounded impressed and surprised, which is a rarity for her. "You're rather efficient, aren't you?" "If I wasn't, you people wouldn't have scouted me," he replied as he started walking toward the elevators that would lead out of the building. "But in this case, you could say that I studied ahead for the final exam." "As long as you're not leaving messes like at the shipping yard," she muttered. "Very well then. Study your mark. Find that bomb. One of the last messages we received from Hawks before he went radio silent again was that the leaders of the PLF were meeting with some shady weapons contractor. Other intelligence and rumors lead me to believe that this is the person who stole the bomb in the first place. If that ends up being the case, we're looking at an army with biological warfare capabilities." "Still think I was too harsh on the dock worker for screwing up the way he did?" "Just do your job." "Thought so." The assassin snickered before he hung up. There was a brief shimmer that surrounded the device before it was shattered into hundreds of pieces that floated away and made their way into a strong gust of wind that was blowing outside the garage. Within seconds, the pieces were scattered beyond hope of reunion, and the young swordsman was on his way with a small smirk on his face. So it is going to be a war, he thought as he began the ride down the elevator. His handler hadn't said as much, but thanks to his quirk, he had known that something like this had been brewing for quite some time. After another moment of silent contemplation, the doors opened to admit him to the first floor, where he would be able to make his way out onto the streets of Mustafa. A new generation of orphans is about to be born, I suppose. I wonder what they'll turn out like when all is said and done. The White Fang targeted you, Kurai asked, just to make sure that he was understanding things correctly thus far. While he awaited her response, he made sure to study Blake's body language carefully, not in the mood for any half-truths or lies of omission. When she nodded without a word, he noticed that she kept avoiding his eyes and that her weight constantly shifted from one leg to another. He might have suspected her of trying to hide something if he hadn't asked a yes or no question, which meant that there was something else contributing to her reticence than her default habit of being a recluse. A horrible suspicion struck him in that moment, one too fitting for him to ignore, which led to his utterance of the words, "You were one of them, weren't you?" Once again, it was all Blake could do to nod in a miserable silence. That silence stretched out for what felt like an eternity to her before she heard Kurai ask, "Why?" His tone was not hostile or condemning like she had expected, which was enough to get her to look up at him. His expression was severe, but there was no hatred or contempt in his eyes, which, against her beliefs and will, ignited a hope in her chest that maybe he wasn't about to turn his back on her. "I guess you could say that I was born into it," she told him. Once she got those words out, it all seemed to come like a flood to her mouth that said, "It's no secret that Americans have always had pretty divisive opinions since our country's foundation, and it's an issue that hasn't shown any signs of being resolved soon. The topic of whether or not people with quirks should be treated like regular people is one that lasted a lot longer in our homeland than it did in other places, which led to groups outside of the government to take harder stances in public. While elected officials continued to argue in Congress, factions emerged. Some wanted to treat quirks like a disease that should be eradicated. Others led with the thought that humans had reached the next stage of evolution, and that those with quirks should be allowed to flourish in the modern age. Of course, there were also those who believed that it should be taken to a step further, that there is no room in the world for people who lack quirks. People like the White Fang. Kurt surmised, to which she nodded. They started out as a faction representing people who had been shunned because of animalistic quirks, Blake explained. In the early days, and even in some places in today's society, people with animal features were often called demi-humans, and the White Fang emerged in order to defend them and see to it that they were treated equally. They began in a similar manner to that of those who followed those in the peaceful protests held by Martin Luther King Jr., but it didn't take very long for them to be dissatisfied with the results they were getting. They got violent, and since they were going up against people who lacked superhuman abilities, they realized there was little to stop them from achieving whatever goals they set for themselves, which I'm assuming included the deaths of anyone that stood in their way. Kodai deadpanned. It pretty much became less about representing those who had been oppressed than about doing the same kind of harm to the oppressors they had suffered under, the shadowy girl confirmed. They started out by targeting politicians and companies that sought to exploit those with quirks, but of course, that was only the beginning. As time went on, more people were being born who had quirks, and the quirkless realized that they were the dying breed instead of the other way around. The violence inspired by those with quirks only served to further the idea that to survive, their best option was to accept this new reality. They started working toward peace, but for the White Fang it was too little too late. They had gotten a taste for the blood of the people who had wronged them, and with a more radical leadership than the founders, the majority of them decided that the world would be better off without quirkless people to hold them back. The White Fang has been around for that long. I couldn't help but ask. The heroes in the States seriously haven't been able to put a stop to them in all this time? Evil doesn't die, could I? Blake told him sadly. It just takes different forms once it's born. The heroes have stamped out several iterations of the White Fang, but as long as the idea of quirk supremacy exists, so will the organization's purpose. So not all that different from the Meta Liberation Army following in Destro's footsteps. Her friend mused grimly. When he received another nod from the girl, he decided to say, "You mentioned being born into the White Fang. Mind elaborating on that?" Blake shifted uncomfortably in place for a few more seconds, but eventually she answered, "One of the earlier reformations of the White Fang was helmed by my grandfather." Kurai's eyes widened in surprise, but he made no sound to interrupt as she went on to say, "My father was part of the organization when he was younger, but when he met my mom, she showed him that even as someone ostracized for her appearance, she could find ways to be content and happy with her life. When he saw how at peace she was, even with her circumstances, he changed. He left the White Fang and settled down with my mother, though that wasn't the end of his troubles with them." "What, they attacked your family?" Kurai guessed, though he immediately knew that was wrong. There was so much that he was trying to keep track of, but he had the feeling that there are even greater surprises in store for him before the evening would end. "No, but after my grandfather passed away, senior members of the White Fang kept trying to convince him to come back to a leadership role," Blake told him. "Him and Mom did their best to keep me away from them, but I always overheard bits and pieces of their conversations, enough that I started getting curious about the group and started doing some digging on my own. One day, a group of people I'm pretty sure were with humor eyes attacked my mom and some of her friends while we were at a park." Her voice turned bitter as she said this and became even more so as she went on. "No heroes came to save them. My mom and her friends were beaten half to death in broad daylight while I could only watch helpless. They probably would have died if not for Adam." She shuddered as the name left her mouth, as if saying it was an attempt at ridding her body of some vile curse. "He came in out of nowhere and destroyed the people hurting my mom and the others. He was every bit as merciless as they had been, but all I saw that day was a boy with the power and conviction to save other people like us when no one else could or would. He invited me to join the White Fang, and I accepted." She let out a soft snort of disappointment as she cast her eyes downward again while saying, "I didn't even tell my parents that I was leaving because I knew they would try to talk me out of it, and that they might succeed if I gave them the chance. I was only 12, but I was recruited into a fully realized criminal organization masquerading as righteous crusaders. I helped them destroy businesses, risked and ruined the lives of people who had nothing to do with the wrongs that had been done to people with quirks. Adam, he was my mentor and partner through it all, teaching me everything that I know about swordplay and how to use my quirk in battle. He was so good at convincing me to ignore the feeling in my gut that told me those people didn't deserve what we were doing to them. That we were punishing bystanders for things that happened years ago before we were even born. I just wanted to make sure that those awful people and everyone like them would learn not to mess with us just because we've been born with something that they didn't have. So for a long time, I learned to ignore my conscience. When I was 14, I had gotten in so deep that I started killing people who exploited others for their quirks. At first, it was businessmen and women who had profited off their predecessors' exploits. But when we started going after their families and friends just to make a point, I finally realized that we were going too far. I realized that I had pushed away everything that made my parents who they were, and what made them such amazing, wonderful people. That I had betrayed everything that they raised me to be, all because I wanted to feel powerful and accepted by someone who cared more about a revenge that wasn't even his to take than he did about me. The last mission I went on for them, we were supposed to steal a train full of hero tech from Support Industries and kill the crew to board the train. I helped them steal the cargo, but I cut my ties with them then and there by letting the crew get away on the lead car. I ran away, like I ran from my parents, and made my way to Second Amendment, hoping that my skills would let me become a hero that could maybe make up for all the harm that Adam and I had caused. Tears were gathering in the corners of her eyes by the end of her latest explanation, which led Kurai to yet another conclusion too fitting to ignore. This Adam guy, he said slowly as if testing the shark-infested waters with his words alone. You followed him for years after he saved your mom. He taught you to master your quirk and survive in a world that had wronged you. He was the one who broke your heart, wasn't he? Yeah. She gasped as she dasted at her eyes with the back of her hand before laughing bitterly at herself. Look at this, she sniffed. I told myself that he was in the past, that he shouldn't mean anything to me anymore, and here I am crying about him all over again. Pretty pathetic, huh? I mean, Kurai shrugged before scratching at the back of his head and replying, I don't think so. If Mina had ever done to me what he must have done to you, I probably never would stop crying about it. I've never had my heart broken like what you've told me about, but this does confirm what I've thought about you ever since you changed your mind in the forest and decided that we should go and help the others instead of making for the base camp. And what's that? You're made of sterner stuff than me. He grinned slightly at the girl, causing her to stiffen in place with an incredulous look on her face. I mean it. You moved on from something that would cripple me, and you've held your head up high ever since. Yeah, I know, you've come close to giving up a few times, but you haven't. You're still here, in spite of everything that you've suffered and lost, and that's no small feat. You're strong, Blake, and if anyone ever has the gall to say otherwise, do yourself a favor, kick their ass. I almost wish that I could. She said in a small voice, if I really was that strong, maybe the White Fang wouldn't have attacked Second Amendment. Did the White Fang attack your school, or did Adam? Kurai asked, his smile disappearing in favor of his more serious expression. They had had their eye on it for a while, but I never thought they would actually try to attack it, Blake replied somberly. Professor Osmond has always stressed the importance of protecting every innocent life, regardless of who they are or what they can contribute to society. It's something that should be a given, I know, but it's really amazing how often people forget or ignore those kinds of things. Don't gotta tell me that, Kurai muttered, to which Blake nodded. To answer your question more thoroughly, the White Fang attacked our school, but Adam came after me and my team. She told him as she gave vent to another shudder, this one time reaching up to grip her arms and almost seemed to shrink into herself. He attacked us with even greater ruthlessness than I saw him use the people to hurt my mom, and all the people who he felt wronged our kind. To him, I'd become worse than the quirkless enemies of the White Fang because not only had I betrayed the organization, I had betrayed him, and he made me pay for it. Without warning, Blake's hand suddenly moved to lift her shirt and sweater up from her hip, which immediately caused Kurai to turn red and spin around on his heel. Blake, what the hell? He sputtered. Put that back on! I'm still decent, moron, she growled from behind him. I need to show you something, so do us both a favor and turn back around. It's freezing out here. What am I going to see if I do? He muttered, not daring to turn around just yet while his cheeks continued to burn. One of the reasons I'll never forgive myself for gutting you on Naboo. The words were delivered so softly that he almost missed them, but once he had registered their meaning, he knew what he had to do. Slowly, as if afraid that turning his head might get it chopped off, he revolved his body until he could see that Blake had only lifted her clothing partway to expose her right hip and midriff, where he could now see a 3-inch scar that had been placed just above her hip. What the hell? He gaped, his eyes widening as he felt the familiar burning sensation echo from the scars on his chest and back that had been made by Blake's sword. Is that what I think it is? There's a matching one on my back, but I'm guessing you've seen enough, she said bitterly while lowering her shirt. You're the expert on bodily injuries. What do you make of that? I mean, he shook his head, trying to get his mind to process the even more shocking information that had been shoved in his face. It took him a few seconds, but once he was able to think about the exact placement of the blade that must have opened her up, he was able to say, if that went clear through you, it would have gone through your muscles, but not your organs. Very painful, but as long as first aid was received quickly, the only real danger would have been in bleeding out. Here, he paused before asking, he wasn't trying to kill you, was he? He said he was going to make me watch him kill my friends. She said, the bitterness in her voice increasing by the syllable. He said it was because he loved me too much to let me go, and this was the only way to make me understand that I could only ever belong with him. This time, Kurai gave vent to a shudder as he felt an ice crawl down his spine in response to an evil that only a very few could ever inflict upon another. That's horrible, was all he could think to say. I'm so sorry, Blake. Professor Goodwitch arrived in time to save us, and they captured a lot of the members who had attacked the school, but Adam got away. She said almost as if she hadn't heard him. He's still out there, waiting to come back for me again. Once he has a target, he never gives up. Ever. It's one of the reasons our team was sent out here to UA. To keep me away from him while the stateside heroes and law enforcement track him down. She shook her head and shut her eyes while adding, they won't find him. He'll either track me down out here or he'll wait for me to go home, and then he'll finish what he started. After another brief pause, she murmured, maybe it's what I deserve. Maybe it's the only way to atone for everything that I've done. No. Her gaze was drawn upward to see Kurai all but glaring at her as he said, you're a hero, and heroes don't get to take the easy way out, Blake. Death is not the way to atone for those who want to repent of their actions. You want to do what's right, then live through your punishment. His tone softened ever so slightly as he continued, I can see now why you want to escape this war, but you need to accept that it's not an option for us. You made some really bad decisions, but you don't get to just up and run when the consequences start catching up to you. It may work for a little while, but one day it will catch up to you, just like it did to my mom and dad. So saying, he took a couple of steps forward until he was less than 2 feet away from the girl and jabbed a stiff finger into her shoulder as he growled, you created a problem for your friends, so you don't get to cop out and leave it for them to handle. The movement was not rough, just with enough force to get the point across, but to the girl it felt as though he had laid every accusation she had ever tried to keep to herself on her shoulders, and it was nearly enough to make her crumble. I'm sorry, she started to cry. I'm so sorry. I just don't want to hurt anyone anymore, and with this war there's going to be so many people who get hurt who don't deserve it, and I don't want to take part in that again. Then when the time comes, fight to end it as quickly as possible. Kurai told her with no room for arguments in his tone. I don't want to see innocents hurt any more than you do, but even more than that, I don't want to see anything resembling Ares' future come to pass in this time. The only way for that to happen is for us to stop the Paranormal Liberation Front as quickly as possible. If they get a foothold in Japan, if Ari and I fail, there will be nothing to stop Shigaraki from moving on to the rest of the globe. We refuse to turn back time to avoid the war, and the fallout is the consequence that we will suffer. We choose to accept that, just as you'll have to find a way to accept the burdens that come with your decisions. Blake simply stared at him for a few silent moments as the tears continued to fall down her face before she finally said, are you trying to convince me or yourself with those words? At that, he visibly deflated, his shoulders slumping as he muttered, that obvious, huh? Yeah. Well then, there you have it. Kurai chuckled bitterly. Neither one of us can escape the guilt of our decisions, can we? I guess not. Blake sniffed as she wiped at her eyes again. But I guess there's something to be found in misery shared. Story of my life as a hero. Her friend laughed again, though there was a bit more genuine humor in it this time. So, does that mean that you're less miserable now that you've spilled your guts to... Wow, I could just not use poorer words even if I tried. Could I? According to Ashida, that seems like a pretty regular problem for you. She answered as they both unconsciously massaged the scars given to them by steel. She was almost tempted to wonder how he was moving this into more humorous territory, but she couldn't discount the thought almost as soon as it had formed. He starts reciting laws or cracking jokes when he's scared. She remembered him saying right before he had lost his arm to Moonfish. I guess it's good to know that some things never change. Ah, crap. Kurai groaned as he smacked himself on the head, having remembered his promise to his fiancée and realizing what time of day it was. I was supposed to head back when the sun went down. It's going to be dark by the time I get back. I mean, it's going to kill me. Sure enough, there was only a little light left from the descending sun in the sky. You have super speed and you can fly. Blake said in a deadpan. You can be there in like 5 seconds. I'm not going to make you walk back to the dorms on your own. He protested, but she was already shaking her head. Go on without me, she insisted. I could use some quiet time to myself after all this. You're not going to run on me as soon as I turn my back, are you? He inquired with a raised eyebrow. He was a little surprised when she locked eyes with him and said, Never. Never, huh? I'll never turn my back on you, she swore. You never turned away from me when I needed you, just like the girls on my team. You've always spoken the hard truths that everyone else has either been afraid to say or can't see it themselves. So no, I'll never run away from you, even if it means going into war again. He regarded her in silence for a few more moments, and for a split second, Blake wondered if she had said too much and revealed that's what she had sworn to keep private. However, all he did was nod once at her before saying, I'll see you for dinner with the rest of your team, provided any of us can work up an appetite. All right, she agreed. See you in a bit. Later. With a burst of black lightning, Kurdite took to the sky and made a beeline for the freshman student dorms, quickly being lost to sight. Once he was gone, Blake let out a long breath she hadn't realized she had been holding. She could have walked back with him, or maybe even flown with him if he'd offered, but she knew that would be very unwise on her part for 2 reasons. 1, she was grateful for the years of discipline and self-control that had kept her from launching herself into his arms the moment she had realized that he didn't hold her in contempt for her past, but she didn't know how much longer her resolve would hold out. 2nd, and perhaps more pertinent, was the fact that everyone's emotions were still running high back at the dorms, and if Ashido had seen the two of them returning together, she might well have jumped to conclusions and just melted Blake on the spot. The pink girl had not done anything aggressive toward the American since their little chat before Christmas, but Blake's senses had been honed to the finest degree in order to stay away from unwinnable situations that could have gotten her killed, or at least permanently damaged, and right now that sense was going off like crazy. I think I'll take the long way back, just to be safe, she thought to herself as she started moving back into the shadows of the forest, quickly melting into them and becoming unseen to any potential observer. By the next morning, the news about the Safety Commission's orders concerning the League of Villains and their associates was made known, and the public was in an uproar. There were heated arguments on both sides, with some calling for the officials' collective resignation, while others praised them for finally taking the threat seriously and authorizing an appropriate response. Some heroes offered their resignations in protest, saying that they would not take part in something that had forced even children to become killers, but many seemed to accept this new mandate as part and parcel of what could be expected of any hero. Those who did speak out against this new development were nothing short of scathing with their comments. Perhaps most surprising was when Endeavor himself, a man who had long pushed for less oversight when it came to the punishment of villains, publicly demanded a recall of the order and encouraged other heroes to do the same. When he was questioned about his sudden change of heart, he merely answered that it was the duty of the older generation to prepare their successors for what would come, not force them to take on the ugly burdens of the world in their place while they could still do something about it. In spite of all these oppositions, the Commission refused to rescind the order, and the days turned into weeks as both the villains and heroes prepared themselves for the war that had been set into motion. Classes for the hero course had all been but cancelled, with Nezu and the staff making the collective decision to focus on training their students for combat, knowing that it could well make the difference between life and death for them. Akarui had seemingly withdrawn into himself, spending all of his hours either in the support lab or in his room, with barely a word to his brother to let him even know that he was alive. During this time, Izuku and Ochako shared the plan that he had concocted with the rest of their classmates and set about putting it into motion. It was initially met with some hesitance, but once they were able to demonstrate the edge it could give them over their enemies, that it could enable them to save innumerable lives, Class 1A accepted his idea without any further arguments. Kurdai held out the longest on putting the plan into effect, but when he did concede that it was something that could turn the tide vastly in their favor, he even went so far as to improve on the design in a way that left Izuku's jaw drop for a good 10 minutes. 1 week before they were all meant to move out against their enemies, Akarui finally called up their class to the support lab, where he, Mei Hatsume, and Recovery Girl were waiting with grim looks about their mouths. The presence of the school nurse and the fact that this was probably the first time any of them had seen Hatsume without a smile was soon put aside for the students when Kurdai's brother stepped forward with what looked like a high-tech hexagon above his chest and a deadly serious expression on his face. If you've been wondering where I've been for the last month, I'm about to answer that, he said shortly. Hatsume and I have been working on something to give you all an advantage that no one else but us could. What we've created will help you not only in the coming war, but for the rest of your careers as heroes. We needed Recovery Girl to help us to apply the finishing touches, which she has agreed to do so for all of you as well. Presenting the last hero costumes that you'll ever need. Hatsume said as Akarui tapped the hexagon on his chest twice, and prompting a collective gasp of surprise from Aizawa's students as it suddenly spread like fine sand spilled on a waxed floor across his entire body, until he was encased in blue armor with an orange trim that made him resemble a humanoid dragon. Akarui, you... Kurai paused, a stunned look on his face before he asked, "This is based on the suit Ares said you wore in the future, isn't it?" "I came back with some of the nanotech on me, and I gave it to your brother to try and reverse engineer them," the girl explained, turning everyone's attention to her for a moment. "Thanks to the nanites I gave him and the schematics provided by Mirtanaster from Shnia Support Industries, he more than succeeded." "More than?" "I've created new suits for every freshman in the hero course, as well as a few people in the upper classes who I believe will make the best use of them," Akarui added as his helmet retracted, revealing his head once again, though his expression remained unchanged. "With all the information at my disposal, plus a good deal of trial and error, Hatsume and I were able to move beyond even nanotechnology. We not only created, but have successfully been able to manipulate programmable matter." "Programmable matter?" Yairozu gaped, the more astute among them looking similarly shocked. "Even in this day and age, that material is thought to be impossible to manufacture without a quirk. Not even I've been able to figure out how to make it." "No offense, but you're not as smart as he and I are when we're working on our babies," Hatsume said through a grin, strained though it was. "These suits are impact resistant to the point that bullets from automatic rifles will hardly leave a bruise on you," Akarui went on to say, "which should tell you how the defenses will hold out against a majority of attack-type quirks you'll encounter. Each one is suited to your unique needs and will adapt as your powers grow over time. Hatsume will eventually teach you guys how to implement new functions as time goes on, but for now, you'll have to get used to the suits themselves, though they'll each mimic your old suit's gear as a start." "Wait, if you're not a hero, why'd you get a suit?" Yang asked him, apparently not understanding the full impact of what the two engineers had just accomplished. "You trying to flex or something?" "I was the test subject for the implantation process you required to use these things," the boy answered grimly. "Trust me, some of the more squeamish among you might not want to use these suits once you find out why we needed Recovery Girl." Akarui's suit is linked directly to his brain through an interface that allows him to execute the various functions the instant that he even thinks about them, Hatsume explained as the boy flexed his hand, causing retractable claws to extend from his fingertips. "There's only one way for us to make that possible. Brain surgery," Recovery Girl informed them before anyone could start guessing, causing several of the students to blanch in response. "I installed a chip directly into Hikari's brain that links him to the suit. He said that if anyone should be put at risk during such a procedure, it should be him." "But you wouldn't have done it if you weren't sure that you could," Aizawa murmured, to which the old lady shrugged. "So, how about it?" Akarui asked as the suit retreated back into its container. "Who wants to wear the ultimate hero suits?" "Before anyone answers that, tell me something," Kurai said as he narrowed his eyes at his brother. "Even you couldn't have created programmable matter and designed something this intricate for more than 50 people in just a few weeks. How'd you pull that off?" When Akarui didn't give him an answer immediately, Kurai growled out, "I can see you having come up with maybe 2 or 3 working designs in that time, but the speed you went, 2 or so designs per day plus preliminary testing and assembly. What did you do?" Here, Akarui returned a sharpened gaze along with the answer, "What I had to." "What's he talking about?" Kirishima asked Mina while Kurai's face went red with anger. "You enhanced your quirk again, didn't you?" the elder brother demanded. He then turned to Eri, who met his gaze without flinching as he added, "And you helped him. There's no way he came up with all those designs in a few minutes, even with that brain of his working in overdrive. How many times did you help him? How many times did you rewind him? Help him risk his sanity, if not his life?" "As many times as he asked me to do it," she answered calmly. "He did this for all of us. For you, Kurai. He's done what he can to ensure your survival, and he was willing to pay the appropriate price for it." "The price?" Mina repeated, her eyes widening as both she and Kurai looked at the boy with something like horror. "Aki, what did you do?" "I did what I promised Kurai I would do all those years ago," he replied firmly. "I used my quirk to beat my quirk. I programmed the first successful batch to travel into my brain and eat the tumor that was trying to kill me. All under Recovery Girl and Aries' supervision in case something were to go wrong. And with that threat to my life gone, I was able to move on with your suits, knowing that Hatsume's and my work was as flawless as it needed to be." "Akarui Hogasha, what did you do?" Kurai demanded, his face now pale instead of dark with anger. "I turned down One for All because of the danger posed by someone with my intellect getting his hands on such a power boost," his brother replied in a steely tone without blinking. "Someone like me is too dangerous with that kind of capability, and the actions of Umbra only serve as further proof of that fact, and I refuse to create a possibility where I become someone like him. Now that I have a way of getting around my quirk's only drawback, thanks to Eri, there was only one thing to be done about it." You had her erase your quirk. Mina said hoarsely before either boys could say another word. Aki, you don't have solar intelligence anymore? What I have is a way to keep all of you safe out there. The boy said in a flat tone, though there was a dangerous spark in his eye as he did. And perhaps of equal import, I now have the means to track down Umbra. The next time he makes a move, I'm going to make sure that the heroes nail that bastard to the wall of whatever hideout he's using.
Set the station like the rage consume you, and like a wildfire burning through you. Building a cover from confetti and confessions. Maybe there will be a lesson in the rubble when it's through. Buried in metal and a million memories. The temperature is rising to 1,000 degrees. I never ever learned to let go of the pain. I'll make it all burn till nothing remains.
Oh man.
A lot to unpack.
Yep. Before anyone asks, yes, I planned to do this to Akarui at some point. I wasn't entirely sure of how it was going to happen, but I knew that at some point, they've on the Discord server again. They've kind of made a running joke out of calling him Akarui Ex Machina, because it's like, his quirk is just kind of like the foil to any problem that's too big for them to handle. Guess what? Foil's gone now. How's them for consequences?
Is it though?
I mean, to me it really is, because it's like, he told Kurdai, it's like, if he can become that powerful without any kind of consequence, and like, how do I put this? It's more of a measure of how they were raised and the people that raised them, that he understands how dangerous he actually is if he can have that kind of power without a consequence.
Yeah.
And, now that he's got a way to use that power, it's going to be tempting for him to use it over and over again for any number of reasons. So he is having the foresight to be like, I need to remove this temptation.
Yeah.
Yeah. He's like, I need to end this before it goes any further.
I see.
But we can come back to that in a little bit, because I do want to talk more about that scene, because that scene was so... There are so many scenes in this chapter that were just such a delight to me to write, strictly because of the character interactions.
Yeah, there's a lot of that.
There's a lot of talking that happens in this chapter, but I don't feel like the narrative stood still at any point. Because like sometimes you just get people talking and they're kind of joking around and stuff. It's like, okay, what did that do to the story? It's like, yes, it was funny, and it's fun to have those every once in a while to show them being people.
It definitely kept going, kept moving.
Yeah, I've been trying to be better about like eliminating Deadwood. And I honestly don't think I can be accused of having Deadwood in this chapter, because there's a lot that happens.
There's
like every scene advances the story in some way or another. So we have the opening scene where the teachers have left and the students are kind of starting to deal with the emotional fallout.
Everybody's just kind of coping in their
everybody's like deer in the headlights, and then Kurdai's like, okay, is this my fault? And everybody's like, not everything's your fault, dude.
Yeah, it's not about you, buddy. Come on.
I know you're the main character, but calm down.
Bakugo had to be the guy to say it, because he literally says it's not always about you. And I was like, that needed to be said. And if it had been anybody else, it would have had to have been said with different words. Yeah. But because Bakugo's there and he's Bakugo, I could literally have him say, yeah, this isn't always about you, man. Yeah. That was fun. That was fun. That is a very serious scene, like lots being unpacked. But it was really fun to kind of have Bakugo be the one just cutting to the quick and making the most sense almost. But we do end up getting some pretty interesting ethical discussion happening.
Yes.
Because
a little bit of disagreement.
Yeah, I feel like the best arguments and narrative are the ones where you can really see both sides of the argument. Yeah. And even empathize with both sides. Because it's you understand very well why Aries no, she's like I literally would be playing God, and she's like no one should have that power. But then we also have the people who are like, we don't want to be killers, and you could fix that. And, they go back and forth, and eventually it's like, look, you can complain about this and dislike it all you want.
This is my decision.
But this is my decision. You can't actually make her.
Mm-hmm.
Like that. Like, again, it's the Superman problem. It's like you have you have her with this supposed solution, but not only does that solution have its own set of consequences, you actually cannot make her do it. It's like, technically speaking, none of them there, except maybe Kurai and Deku, can actually make her do anything.
Yeah.
Like, they're the only ones there with enough power to potentially.
Yep. So you come down to the whole conundrum of, it's not whether they can, it's whether they should.
Yeah. There's a lot of that in this chapter.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and not just with Eri.
Yeah.
Like, there's a few instances of that. Like, maybe that's one of the reasons I've enjoyed this chapter so much, because for a minute now, people have been like, okay, it seems like it's like, okay, Eri's overpowered, Akaru's overpowered.
Just solve everything with this team of awesome people.
Yeah. So I'm like, I had to create a situation where it's like, they, like, for lack of a better term, they get in their own way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, that remains to be seen. But essentially, them not making use of these abilities or these decisions is because of the people they are and the way that they've been raised.
Mm-hmm.
So, a lot of moral conundrums with this one, which was fun, because it's been a lot of like, how do we win? Now it's really coming to the portion of of why should we win this way? It's like, now how do we win? Should we win this way?
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. So after that opening scene, everybody's kind of getting it. I don't know why it made me laugh so much, but like the closing line where Mina's just like, yeah, I'll have tea, but I'm also getting cookies because if there was ever a time for stress eating, this is it. I'm just like, I don't know. Maybe like, obviously I'm a dude. I cannot understand the mind of girls.
You're also like, not a foodie.
I'm also not a foodie, but like, I have had friends who are girls, obviously haven't been put in this kind of stress of a situation, because I don't know anybody who has.
Okay, girls are not the only people who stress eat. I'm sorry.
No, I know they're not. I know they're not, but like, I see it more often.
No, yeah.
With like,
it's the kid version.
Like, if I was a more popular person, I'm sure I'd be getting blasted and canceled for this. But I'm like, I've seen girls more often do the stress eating bit than guys do.
It's the kids' version of first, let's get tequila, So.
Is that what that is?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Okay. That makes more sense. Actually.
I need a shot. Yeah, that's what that is.
This is a 3-shot problem.
That's me. That's also me, because
oh man,
9 times out of 10 the solution is definitely cookies and not booze.
We again on the Discord the other day we were talking about like how I forget how this conversation got started, but we were like, how would each of them like handle alcohol? And I'm like, Ida and Kurai would be the worst. You give them like half a mimosa, and they're gonna be wasted.
Oh my
and they're like, why mimosa? I'm like, well, we know it's canon that Ida's fuel is orange juice, so it makes sense that like if he's gonna have an alcoholic drink, it would be like a screwdriver or a mimosa, because those have orange juice in them. Like, it's one of the main ingredients. And Kurai, he likes orange juice and orange soda because he's grown up having fun around the Idas, and that's their fun drink is orange soda.
So funny.
So I went to this whole psychology of like why he would go for this first.
Oh my god.
I'm just like, huh, maybe I think a little bit too much about this.
That's hilarious.
But yeah, that was, so I'm like, that just brought that up for me. I'm like, all right, cool. How many mimosas are they gonna do with this?
That's funny.
All right. So then we get one of the big scenes where it's like it's short, but we've got Akarui like trying to decide. He's like, okay, logically it makes sense for me to do this, but I really don't want to.
Yeah.
He's like, I need to do it, but I don't want to. Need to do it, don't want to. Need to do it, need to do it, don't want to do it. It's like, and then he's just like, I could call Eri and have her fix this again, but then that's like, he's like, but then that's abusing my abilities. And then he's like, and he realizes he's like, I can abuse, he's like, I can very easily abuse this ability. So something needs to be done about that.
Yeah.
Then we get to Kurai. So I wanted to have Kurai. This was, once I started it, it wasn't difficult to scene to write, especially since it's so short. But like, I was trying to figure out. I was like, okay, where on campus does Kurai go to be alone? I'm like, there's, it's a big campus. There's any number of places. Like, he could probably ask his brother, hey, can I just hang out in your shop for a minute so I can be away from people, or just go hang out at Gym Gamma in a corner, just not be bothered by people, or like just go even sit in the classroom and just kind of quiet study or whatever. But I was like, all of that seemed too generic.
Yeah, I was
like I could have made any of those places work, and like
any of the bro characters would go to those places.
Well, like, like Bakugo and Kirishima, they're all going to the gym and all that, to get workout and kind of like burn through their feelings or whatever that is.
Can't relate, huh?
Not a whole lot. I don't like working out when I'm frustrated. I do martial arts when I get frustrated, so I don't know if that counts.
That counts.
Does that count?
That counts.
Okay, all right. So we get, but like I said, all that was generic. I could have made any of those places work, because like, I like before I honestly feel kind of stupid for not having thought of this place first, but before that, I honestly was going to do the building where they all had their first training exercise, like kind of as a way for him to reflect on like, like how far he's come since he first walked into UA, kind of thing. But it again wasn't compelling. It wasn't compelling enough. Yeah. So I was, and then I feel dumb for taking so long to get to this place, but I was like, no, of course. I'm like, that's the place he would go. To kind of get himself grounded again.
Basically, where he made his grand reappearance. And
more, yeah.
Off
and we also get
50% of the readers.
And yeah. Like one of the other things that was like, it was kind of small, but I thought was important was like how he was going about his meditations, because like he thinks about how he used to do his meditations to help hone or cleanse this part of his power. And even though that's not a factor for him anymore, it's still a part of who he is.
Yeah,
and it helps.
It's still a practice.
Yes, it's still
does.
Yeah, so I thought that was important. I thought that I wanted there to be a lot of like him trying to reconnect with who he was, like before he got caught up in all this insanity. Let's see. Then we've got Izuku and Ochako cooking up something. They'd be cute. It's kind of implied that something's happening with the giving heart technique where Deku can share his power. But what exactly is going on with that, you guys are gonna have to wait and see. But there's something that's gonna be layered into that plan that I think people are gonna like it. You liked it. You liked what ended up happening with that.
I don't remember.
You don't remember?
So I'm gonna be re-surprised.
Oh, okay. I don't know. I remember pitching you the idea of what I was gonna do with all this, and you got all excited for it. So okay. I was like, all right, cool. But that's a very brief scene. Then we cut back to a somewhat longer one where Kurai is being stalked by Blake. Not really. But really. No. But like, she enjoys being in force. Is something that's interesting about her character. Like I went back and watched some of the episodes. Like I was like, okay, she goes off to be by herself when she's upset. Like I've seen that several times. But it's interesting the way her body language is whenever she's like out in the wilderness or in a forest, especially. She's a lot more relaxed. Yeah. She's a lot more relaxed with herself. Like if she's around other people or she's like in a city, usually she like, especially in the earlier seasons, which is when they would have been in school, which is where I'm kind of basing the psychology off of here. She's like always reading something. Yeah. Like she's not approachable. She's just kind of like she's got her nose buried in a book. She doesn't really want to interact with people too much. Like she gets better about it like as seasons 2 and 3 go on, but like you kind of see her default there.
Yeah.
So her being more relaxed in the forest, I'm like, okay, she wants to be alone. There's forest ever in there. And I did want to have a conversation, like a much more extended conversation between her and Kodai. Like, because they're both interesting. Like, to me, they're both interesting characters. And given the history that they have with each other at this point, again, like, Kodai doesn't know anything about how she feels about him. But she is a friend of his. Like, she's a good friend. They face death together. He trusts her. And there's a lot of that on her side, too. It gets taken a step further for her because of those things.
Yeah.
Like, she wasn't infatuated with him, and then these other things happened. She became infatuated with him after the fact. Like, you know, like, sorry, I got all tongue-tied. She wanted to be his friend before she became interested in him in that capacity.
See, I think I get so frustrated with Blake though, because it's like it hasn't been that long, but I'm like, come on, why so basic?
How
like,
so?
Because he's one of the most powerful boys in the hero course.
No.
I know it has nothing to do. I'm just like, for me, the emo kid, I'm just like, whatever. Okay. So
again, like again, I hate love triangles. I'm trying my hand at it. I think I'm doing all right with it, mostly because of the way that she is handling the whole thing.
Yeah, she's not being annoying.
Yeah, and there's there's no hidden motive for her in this entire conversation.
Like,
she just
we
wants
know
to.
She's moping. Nobody else knows why she's moping. You know,
And that's why this conversation needed to happen.
Yeah.
It's just like Kodai's like, okay, you know, like we even get it from Kodai. He's like, okay, you know what? You really pissed me off. You don't get to. He's like, you don't get to tell me and Eri off like that, and then just walk away without giving me an explanation for it. That's not how this works. Yeah. And he's like, I got the truth about my own quirk out of my mother. He's like, you really think you're gonna stop me from finding out the truth? She's like, you put your mother in jail, and we see that kind of stings him. But we also see that it's born out of a place of fear for her.
Yeah.
Because like she's afraid that he'll come to hate her after finding out, you know, what she did in her past.
Yeah.
But you know what? Like I honestly had to go back and forth on how he was going to react to this, and it kind of was decided. Like he says he's like, do your friends know about this? She said, yeah. He's like, okay, if they know about this and they accept you for who you are, and they trust you, then I don't really have a reason not to either. Like, because they've been around her longer. They know more of the history. You know, if anybody was gonna shun her, it would have had to have been them.
Oh yeah.
What was I gonna say? Like, and it was the progression of that conversation was interesting for me because we see Kodai get stronger and stronger in his reasoning and his logic and how he presents it, and then Blake just kind of more or less undoes it by asking him. She's like, "Are you telling me?" She's like, "Are you saying all of these things to convince me or yourself?" And he just kind of like collapses a little bit.
Yeah.
He deflates and he's like, "Is that obvious?" Because like, you know, he and Eri have discussed this. He knows why Eri can't turn things back, and he even agrees with it. But there has to be a part of him that wishes that they could.
Oh yeah.
Like he wishes that they could avoid this entire catastrophe that's coming.
Absolutely.
But he also knows that the consequences would far outweigh the positives.
The benefits.
But yeah, I wanted to give that moment of clarity for both of them.
Yeah. That was powerful.
It was it was important for both of them, but I think it's more important for him at this point because he, you know, his mental struggles have really been taking a toll on him lately. You know, he's gotten better, but they're still there. And like even now, you could see that he's still questioning. He's like, did I make the right decision in giving my power to Deku that resulted in all of this? Because that decision resulted in the ruined future, which resulted in Eri coming back and trying to fix things, which results in this new timeline that they're now in. And he's like, even now, he's still wondering, did I do the right thing back then? He's like, what if I convinced Deku to give the power to somebody else? And like, he doesn't say it in as many words, but you can see how all of this is still eating at him.
Yeah.
So, like, he's trying to logic the heck out of everything because that's just his coping mechanism.
Yep.
Let's see.
Can't worry about the current situation if you're having anxiety about what you did 8 years ago. Just kidding. It wasn't that long ago.
Oh man, let's see. I'm interested to see what people think of how I integrated the White Fang backstory into the world of Your Hero Academia.
Well, because it just fits.
It does.
Fits.
To me, it was like absolutely this works. I was like, we got a whole movie about how there's, pure-blooded human supremacy, essentially. Like there.
And then we also have the whole thing in the current OG arc with what was the name they had for the people who have quirks that make them look animalistic? Heteromorphs. Yeah. So I mean that totally lends itself.
I 100% took a shot at how America does things because I feel like the shot needed to be I mostly write to provide an escape, but there are some reflections that are made, and I'm not going to apologize for it. And you see throughout history, America has had a lot of division, especially over issues that are kind of it should be a no-brainer. And it's like, how long? It's kind of pathetic and sad to see how long it took for society to understand, hey, these are people too.
Yeah.
Basically that's and you get you end up with people who tried to do things the right way, like the whole Martin Luther King Jr. movement, and I mentioned that in here. But then you end up with stuff like BLM, which just takes it way too far, and that's terrorism.
Yeah.
So it's like it starts out from a place of trying to we want to be on equal ground, and we want it to do it the right way. But the problem is that the world is just kind of so evil that when you try to do things the right way, you don't get results very quickly, if at all. So what ends up happening is human nature takes its course, and people get violent.
Oh yeah.
So that's kind of the White Fang in this instance. Is they tried to be a peaceful protest group, and that wasn't working out. And then they realized, hey, we have superpowers and they don't. Why are we holding back?
Exactly.
So yeah, that was I was like, I knew I was gonna be stepping into a little bit of a political puddle, a little bit of political waters with that, but I'm like, just given where the original canon is at this point in the story and how they're dealing with that whole thing, I'm like, it felt like a good time to incorporate this part of the history. So yeah, I'm interested to see how people respond to the integration of the White Fang. Let's see. What was your? How did you feel about the Lady Nagant being contacted by Umbra?
Big oof.
Big oof.
I was just like, this is not what we need right now. I mean, it makes sense.
Yup.
It fits, but no. But why?
There's a couple of people I know who read the story who are big fans of Lady Nagant.
Oh,
so I'm like, they're either gonna love this or they're gonna hate it. There's no in between for this.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, I was like, Lady Nagant's a great character.
Oh yeah.
I'm like her design is cool, her quirk is cool, her character's cool. I love her role in the story. I'm like, she's too cool not to use. Oh, but I could use her this way instead.
Yep.
Ooh. Yeah, as soon as I was introduced to this character, I was like, I know exactly what I'm gonna do with this.
I remember.
Stupid cough. What was I gonna say? I don't know. Did that feel like it was out of left field for you? Or
No.
Okay. Yeah.
No, it fits.
It fits,
the
okay.
way that you tend to kind of bring all these intricate pieces together to come to a head, it makes sense.
Okay. Let's see. Next scene, we've got Roman Torchwick doing his.
That's another big oof.
Yeah. I remember coming up with the idea So I did want Roman Torchwick to be in this story. I originally was gonna have him as a competitor for that other weapons contractor that supports the League of Villains.
Yeah.
But I decided
I think you read me a little bit that you worked.
So I was originally going to introduce him a lot earlier, but then I just had this gut feeling where I was like, nah, I need to save him for something else.
Gotcha.
So I took him out of the equation.
I was originally forgotten that you taken that part out.
Yeah, originally I was going to introduce him around the same time as Cinder. But I like what I've done here better.
Okay.
Because I was like, I need to save him for something big. I was like, I need to save him for something else.
That's news to me because I don't know why I just had it in my head that you had kept that part.
Mm-mm.
So I think whatever you read me, I just assume it's in the in this canon.
That's
so,
funny. No, like we've seen him in one very brief scene before, like when Shadow was trying to figure out like who took the trigger.
That's right. Okay, that's what I'm remembering.
Okay, yeah, he's like who took the trigger. Well, now we know what happened with the trigger. Roman Torchwick is manufacturing it into quirk enhancers for the Meta Liberation Army.
Yep.
So I'm like, you're gonna have like 100,000 people ready to go with quirk enhancers.
No.
Oh yeah. I'm like, all right. How do people feel about the scales being tipped now? Because I know like general rule of thumb, if I'm gonna introduce someone with a whole lot of power, there needs to be something to tip the scales back in the favor of whoever they were set against to at least even things out.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like something massive had to happen. So like once I had the whole area thing cemented, I was like, okay, how do I make the Paranormal Liberation Front more threatening again? Because if it's just air, like you could throw Eri, Kodai, and Deku at these guys, and they wipe the entire schmucks. They wipe the entire gathering of schmucks out, like no contest.
Yeah.
But if I do this instead, then we've got a bigger problem. You okay?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, and then I really enjoyed that bit because Torchwick is like, it's very fun to write characters who control the people that they're working for because they are 100% like, you need me and you know it.
Mm.
It's like, it doesn't matter that you're all probably way more powerful than I am. If you shoot me, you're not going to get what you need to make this work. And he's just milking it.
Yeah.
And then I don't know what possessed me to have Neo and Toga rub each other the wrong way. I just like as soon as I put Neo in that room, I was like, her and Toga are not gonna mix.
It's just too much girl power, evil girl power in one place.
I cannot give you a rhyme or a reason as to why I decided to literally have them at each other's throats. But I started writing the scene and it just worked so well for me that I was like, yeah, I gotta keep this. I was like, this feels precisely in character for both of them. I have to do it. The other way that could have gone, and I'm glad that I didn't because I honestly don't like spending much time with Toga's character, is it would have been Toga asking Neo how to get a guy that she likes to pay attention to her.
Which would be in character.
Which would be in character, but not as much as her, like, just kind of having it out for Torchwick because she pissed her off. Like, it would have ended up being for comedy, and I didn't want to go for too much comedy in this, because that would have just ended with Neo being...
Yeah.
Well, just Neo can't speak. So she's just kind of looking at Toga like,
Yeah. Yeah. Which would
actually, technically, Neo can speak, which would have made it even funnier. So she can't speak when she's in her own form, but if she turns into other people, she can talk.
Speak, yeah.
Yeah, she's mute, but if she transforms into other people, she can talk.
Yeah.
So that would have made it, like, even... Like, it would have been really funny, because she's going to act like she can't talk. And then I would have had it, like, her and Torchwick leaving, and then she turns into someone else just to say something. But again, like, I'm trying not to turn into Marvel, like, around Endgame, where just there's way too many punchlines. It's like, don't get me wrong, Endgame is a great movie. Infinity War was better, and even it kind of leaned a little too hard on some of the joke lines.
Yeah.
Like, you can tell that some scenes were written just to set up a punchline.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm trying to be more like first Avengers movie or like Age of Ultron. Which, I don't know why people hate on that movie so much. It was a good movie. Sorry, I'm getting sidetracked here. Point is, I'm trying to keep a good balance between the seriousness and the humor, and the altercation between the two of them was humorous in its own way.
Yeah.
But it also kind of shows just like, oh, Neo's not someone you screw around with. Like, she would have dismantled Toga in 2 seconds.
Yeah.
It, like, wouldn't have been close. And, like, we even have Dobby looking like... And, if Dobby's kind of unsettled by something, it's got to be bad. And then... So, the thing that him and Cinder are cooking up on the side, that's going to be fun when it gets to. That's going to be fun. Let's see. And then we have Mataris being a Mataris. So, interesting thing. When I was first planning this part of the story out, this was where I was first going to introduce him. But then I started thinking about how to introduce the fact that Torchwick got a hold of one of the spare trigger bombs. And so I decided to work Shadow in earlier, even back in the humorized bit, where, the heroes are racing to stop the humorized bombs. He secures one of them, and that's the one that gets stolen later. And Roman Torchwick is the one that steals it. So I was like, I didn't want it to feel like I was just bringing this character in because it would be fun to have him around for this arc. I'm like, I need there to be something more tying him in that validates his presence from page 1.
I'm excited because like he definitely becomes a slightly more valuable and prominent character in this arc.
Yeah.
And I'm excited to see people who know the character and people who don't know the character react to it. Because
same.
It's honestly, I think it's not just let me plug in my favorite OC from the old days.
I think it's like, honestly, other than Shattered Fragment, this might be my best use of him.
Yeah.
Like,
I guess I can see that.
I feel like, obviously it'll be up to you guys. You guys can let me know what you think, but like, I feel very confident.
Once it comes together, because it's not there yet.
It's not there yet. I'm planting the seeds. But, like, with the way that it's turning out, I feel very confident in the way that I've chosen to use him.
Yeah. I think the way I'm looking at it is he kind of almost reminds me, like, I realize he's more of their peer than a teacher. But he reminds me of characters in Naruto like Kakashi, where it's like, they're not the main character, but they have a really awesome backstory that is like pretty powerful and definitely makes sense that they behave the way they do because of that backstory.
Yeah.
And so it's like they're not the main character, but they're powerful.
But they have stuff to contribute
to the plot. And I think that's the way he's used in this specific story.
Like, again, when I originally wrote him in, he was literally just supposed to be there for the licensing arc. That was the only time he was supposed to appear. But then I got an idea about something that should happen, and
that's always what happens.
Well, okay, yeah. But specifically, I needed a character that would fill this role, and I would need them to fill it well.
Yeah.
Is like it really is one of those things. It's like you just can't hand this role over to anybody.
Yeah, you need someone with a good story.
A good reason for being there.
Motivation for being the person they are.
Yeah,
and behaving the way they do.
Yeah, like I have fun writing him. Like, normally that's enough of a reason for me to include a character, is because they're fun for me to put in there. But because I had written him to only be in once, as more or less a throwaway character, if I was going to bring him back, it needed to be for a really good reason.
Yeah. Again, because we have the whole world is getting too small scenario.
Yeah. But, yeah, so we've got him, he's been working on some kind of other side project, which I'm sure you guys can imagine what that involved. He's trying to find the bomb, and then we have him set up for his entrance into the war arc, because Hawks may be getting compromised because they're not hearing from Hawks as often as they should. So we'll see how that whole thing goes, and then you kind of get a little bit of a look into what his backstory might be like, because he has that comment as he's leaving his scene where he's like, okay, there is going to be a war, so a new generation of orphans is about to be born. I wonder what they're all going to turn out like when it's over. Let's see. Then we get Akarui and Blake talking again. We get that whole thing more or less resolved between them. Like one part that I really did like that I wrote in there was like how she almost gets to this mindset of like, maybe if Adam catches me and kills me, that's kind of what I deserve for all the things that I've done. And Akurui's like, no, you don't get to. He's like, no, you brought a problem to your friends.
Yeah.
You don't get to just you don't just get to take the easy way out. He's like, if you're gonna be a hero, you have to live through your punishment.
Yeah.
And like, it's kind of ironic coming from him. But again, he's at a point. He's come to a point where he's like, he understands why thinking that way is useless, and why it's not productive. Like why it's to the detriment of not just yourself, but everybody who is around you and who cares about you. So like, on the one hand, it's ironic coming from him, but on the other, you kind of understand why it has to be him who's saying it. Let's see. What was I gonna say? Then final scene. We get how the hero world is reacting to the kill order. We've got heroes who are quitting in protest. We've got some who are like, all right, yeah, finally time to do something about this. And then then there's the students who are just like, okay, I guess this is a thing. But we even have hero course students who are leaving.
Yep.
Like not in class A, because they're all they've all got a gun to their heads.
Yeah,
they're being blackmailed. And then class B's like kind of like, I'm not gonna go super into why they are not backing out, but you kind of get the idea. It's like, okay,
if they're not,
then
we better stick.
Yeah. It's like they've been more or less. It's like they've all been talking themselves up that they're just as good as class B, and like I'm gonna try and work in a little, like, maybe not a guilt complex, but some sort of regret on Vlad King's part.
Yeah.
Because he's been pushing his students to, everybody's paying attention to Class A. They need to pay attention to you too, because you have just as much to offer. And now he's got his students who are going to go out and prove that they do have just as much to offer in all of this.
Like,
and he has to watch his kids go off into war and possibly be killed.
Yeah, that's like teacher moment on steroids of like, oh no, what did I just create? What did I just start by introducing them to this idea? Because I mean, all teachers have that moment at some point. And
that's gonna be a thing. And then what was what did you think? What did you think about the consequence of Akarui losing his quirk?
I liked it. I mean, I think that it was, how do I say this? It was the most responsible thing to do in a moral sense, I think. I think it just shows his character and the way he's been raised to conduct himself, and he thinks like he realizes that absolute power corrupts absolutely, and he's like, I don't want to see myself becoming a monster. And he knows how the altering of timelines can affect both Kurai and Eri
and everybody,
everyone with the ripple effects. And so he's like, I'm gonna do this thing because I think it needs to be done, but I'm gonna stop here because if this doesn't work, nothing's gonna work.
You have to know when it's enough.
Yeah.
He does, like, there is one thing that he does that's, you could almost call it selfish, but it's more just him like making sure that nothing will go wrong, and that's he keeps his promise to Kurai. He's like I always promised that I was going to use my quirk to beat my quirk, and he did it. He finally found a way. He finally found a way to take the tumor out of his head without getting himself killed.
Yep.
And now that he's kept his promise, and he's done everything that he can to make sure that his brother and everybody that they care about now is going to survive. He's like, all right, now it's enough. He's like, he's just like, if I do any more, it can only be worse.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's. Sorry, I can't help but laugh because I'm like, this is a pretty hefty consequence to their decisions, and just like given what's going to be coming in the war arc, like, man, like this is like this. I don't even think this can be called the heaviest of the consequences it's going to have by a long shot.
I'm so impatient for everyone to be caught up with where I'm at. That you know where I stand, man. I'm like, I don't mean to say release everything you've got. I'm just like I want the big Rubik's Cube truth bomb to be
in two chapters. In 2 chapters, I'm gonna make sure that the Rubik's Cube in my house is hidden away from my wife because I don't want a repeat of what happened a couple years ago.
No, honestly, I'm over it at this point. I mean, I'm not over it.
You say you're over it, but I bet you when I release this and make the emotions new for you again, you're gonna want to throw that Rubik's Cube at me again.
No, I'm not over it because I mean I know where it goes, and I'm not going to say I'm more upset about other things you've done. I'm more emotionally moved by other things you've done at this point because it's been so long.
I'm going to say, like,
we'll see.
I think this is the most upset you've gotten at the story with what's coming.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, like, at any story, honestly, because the only other time I got this upset was when you were writing Shattered Fragment and we were stupid, like, late teenager, early 20-somethings, and I was all salty because you gave one of the characters a love interest that I didn't agree with, and I was just angry. Oh no, yeah, it was when you killed Asuna.
That's right. That's right. You got so mad at me for that.
Upset. Like, I was legitimately upset with you. Like, I wouldn't talk to you. I was so upset.
Oh yeah, she was mad. She was mad at me.
This is the most angry.
I was like, I made a good narrative choice here,
did, and
I just feel so attacked.
And I see it now. It took me some time.
Yeah.
All right, and I just want you guys to understand what I've been holding on to because literally no other human in the world knows about this but me and him, and I'm so sick of sitting on it.
Oh, man. Imagine how I feel. I've been sitting on this for way longer than you.
No, you're not as impatient as I am because you have no problem holding on to it.
I have a lot of problems holding on to it.
Sure, whatever.
Oh no, believe me, I have to fight myself not to rush the production on it, but I'm not going to because I'm practicing discipline.
You're out of control.
No, I'm in control. That's the point. If I was out of control, I would have released it ages ago.
Anyway.
Alrighty. Well, all that being said, I hope that gets you guys excited for the next couple of chapters. The next chapter is going to be more or less... How do I put it? It's not going to be super exciting. I'll be upfront about that. But there are good things that will happen in it. And it's important as a setup for the war arc.
Yes.
Because the war arc begins proper in the chapter after next.
Here we go.
Here we go. Here we go. Oh man, here we go.
All right, guys.
We'll catch you guys on the next one. Thank you so much for listening to us babble on. We have a lot of fun with you guys. Bye-bye. Stay plus ultra until the next one.